Gwen shuffled down the street, barely moving her feet. She was coming back from the shop. She had recently received money, so the elderly woman went to the nearest supermarket. She had to buy potatoes, some meat, some cereals were almost out, and also milk, flour, and sugar. The bag was heavy, although before for Gwen it was not a weight. In the cow she used to pull hay with a pitchfork, carry huge boxes, and carry buckets full of milk or water. It was a lot of work, but now Gwen was in her 70s, and age was certainly taking its toll. Her back often ached, her arms were weak, and she dragged the bag from the supermarket with great difficulty, slowly stopping every now and then to catch her breath. A couple of times she was helped by passers-by and two teenage boys with school bags on their shoulders, and a middle-aged woman and a tall young guy offered to help her. But Gwen refused with a smile. She was in no hurry to go anywhere. And these people are kind. It was immediately obvious, were in a hurry to do their own thing. So why distract them? Gwen walked so slowly not only because she was held back by a heavy bag, she just did not want to go home. And home, the place where she was now returning, language could not be called. So shelter was home. She used to have a house, spacious, bright, cozy, with a big kitchen and a stove for half a room, with a vegetable garden and a carved arbor, which Gwen's father used to put up. With beloved friends and neighbors nearby, Gwen lived well, although her work was hard. She worked most of her life on the farm in the cow shed and looked after the animals and cleaned the pens. She worked double shifts to provide her son with everything he needed. She would leave in the dark and return when the sun was already setting over the horizon. Her back ached, her arms and legs ached, but still the old woman recalled those times with nostalgia. She felt much happier then than she did now. The cold November rain came suddenly without warning, in the form of a drizzle, as if someone upstairs had opened a tap of ice water. Gwen hurried up. The walk seemed to be canceled. We'd have to go back. There was no way out. The rain was picking up and the wind was picking up. No, there was no way to get home. She had to wait it out. Gwen hurried to the porch of the nearest shop, where she could stand under the canopy until the rain stopped, and then she could go home. On the pattern-tiled platform, people gathered, cheerful children, for whom the sudden autumn downpour was another adventure, frowning adults, late because of the rain, on their business. Gwen's gaze suddenly fell on a young boy. He was standing with his back against the wall, staring indifferently at the street. Bright turquoise eyes, well-defined cheekbones, fringes falling down to his forehead, the color of ripe wheat, a real beauty. He must have a lot of girls. He looked just like Sebastian, a guy Gwen had known for only 2 days of her life. It had been almost 4 decades ago, and yet the older woman remembered every feature of the man's face, his scent, and the words he'd said to her. Sebastian, that man, if still alive, had long forgotten his casual acquaintance. How many had he had? Young girls are attracted to good looks. Sebastian does not realize that he has played such a role in the life of one of his many admirers. A key role, you could say. The guy Gwen was secretly watching pulled his phone out of his pocket and stared at the screen, occasionally running his finger across the display. He was either watching a video or reading something. Young people nowadays are so dependent on these gadgets. Good or bad, Gwen didn't know. Her youth was quite different. Gwen was born into a family of a tractor driver and a milkmaid. When she was only 2 years old, she became the eldest child. Her parents had another daughter who was named Kimberly. The family lived poorly, but decently. They did not starve, did not go in rags, but also did not go to resorts. Fur coats and luxury cars did not buy. Their parents worked hard, so Gwen and Kimberly learned early to take care of the house. Gwen, looking at modern children, who, in her opinion, overprotective parents, marveled. She and her sister, at the age of 7 or 8 years old, could already wash the floors, and lunch, and cook dinner. Not only that, the girls cleaned the yard, looked after the livestock, did their homework and laundry themselves, without reminder. And after all, they did not yet have the newfangled wonders of technology, which greatly simplify life: washing machines, dishwashers, multi-cookers, and so on. The girls still had a lot of free time. Having coped with the lessons and finished with household chores, the sisters with a clear conscience went to the street to friends. All their peers lived in the same way and had time to do housework, and at school, and with classmates to play. Gwen and Kimberly have always been very friendly, stood for each other. Mountain. Gwen has the fondest memories of her childhood. Then everything was simple, clear, and easy. The future was seen in bright colors. Gwen at school did not learn very well, unlike her younger sister. Kimberly, that all-on-the-fly grasped, and complex formulas for her were not a problem, and complicated rules of the Russian language in the head of her younger sister, all as if by itself on the shelves laid out. For Gwen, however, the sciences throughout her studies remained Chinese literacy. She seemed to try, she always did her homework. She was not lazy, did not slack off, well, not given, probably. Kimberly, she understood everything effortlessly. She just had such a clear head. Her parents were proud of their youngest daughter. Maybe someone in the family will get a college education, dreamed her mother. You will get out in the people. My daughter, you have a head on your shoulders, reasoned the father. It is foolish to miss such a chance. You just try, and we will help. Gwen was also proud of her sister, but it hurt her to hear such words of her parents. Her mother and father didn't count on her. They didn't expect anything from her. All hope was in Kimberly. Kimberly did her best, studied and never called out her sister. On the contrary, she helped her with her lessons when Gwen was faced with another unsolvable task. Time passed. The sisters grew up. Gwen went to study in the city, went to college, specialty, chose a working technology of sewing products. The girl's hands always grew from the right place. She realized that she would become a good tailor. Right, approved the choice of the eldest daughter's father. The specialty is wonderful. You won't be left without a piece of bread. You have golden hands. Agreed with her mother, on your way. After studying, Gwen decided to stay in the city. The girl got a job in an attire, rented a flat nearby, began to take part-time work, and after a while Gwen already provided for herself. In the attire paid not so much, but very helpful part-time work. Someone to make a dress, someone to sew a coat, someone to sew a tablecloth or curtains to process. Gwen was never out of work, never out of money. Kimberly, meanwhile, studied at the university for a law degree. Ah, how the eyes of parents glowed with pride when they told acquaintances about it. For the eldest daughter, mother and father were calm. Hard-working, handy Gwen will not be lost. But the youngest daughter they were really proud of. You bet, smart, beautiful, and still at university. Gwen was genuinely happy for her sister. What can you do? Well, she was not given to chew the granite of science, but her hands with that end inserted, it is noted by everyone. Time passed. Gwen's friends got married, had children, and the girl herself with it somehow did not add up. Those who liked her did not attract her herself, and guys who liked Gwen, for some reason, preferred other girls. Such a paradox. Learning that the next friend or former classmate was going to marry, Gwen worried, and what if she will remain alone and lonely as an old maid? And even parents added oil to the fire. Every time the eldest daughter came to visit them, they pestered her with questions: when to marry, when children, when will you settle down? Kimberly's mother and father didn't pester her like that. For one thing, she was the youngest daughter. As long as her older sister didn't get married, she didn't have to worry about such things. Secondly, Kimberly was still in school, and after her 5th year, she was going to go to graduate school. Parents were in awe of this choice of the younger daughter, saw her in dreams, a university teacher or even a professor, but from the eldest expected just human happiness, handy, cheerful, good-natured son-in-law, favorite grandchildren. Gwen was almost in despair. Every guy in her environment she looked at as a potential spouse and evaluated young people only from this position. Of course, such an obsession did not go unnoticed and scared off men. And then there was dancing in the club. Gwen went there with her friends. She was not particularly fond of dancing, and from the loud music she immediately began to have a headache, but at the dance can meet someone. Emily's friend is there. She found a husband there. They live together now. They are expecting their first child. Gwen wanted the same love, a husband, a child, simple human happiness. The girl carefully gathered for the event, put on her best dress tight, short, revealing good legs, twisted her hair into curls, painted her eyelashes and lips, looked at herself in the mirror, and, satisfied with the result, slipped out of the house. Gwen didn't hold out much hope, as she went to the dance at least once every 2 to 3 months and always came back with nothing. But that night, that evening turned out to be completely different, unusual, magical, amazing. Sebastian first turned his attention to one of Gwen's friends, the blue-eyed beauty Beatrice. The boy approached the flock of girls to get acquainted. He seemed to address all of them, but he kept his eyes on Beatrice. Gwen realized she was lost. When she saw the stranger's turquoise eyes, they looked cheerful, mischievous, with a slightly sly squint, and his smile like that would drive anyone crazy. Sebastian was a witty and fun conversationalist. He felt confident, not embarrassed like so many of the other guys. The girls in Gwen's company, and she herself, of course, looked at him as if mesmerized. Now Gwen envied Beatrice. She wished she could have this young man looking so interested in her rather than her friend. She would have given a lot for that, but Sebastian asked Beatrice to one dance, then another. Gwen watched them enviously from around the corner. She saw the boy try several times to hold Beatrice tighter than the rules of decency allowed. His hand slipped below her waist every now and then. Beatrice, embarrassed, tried to pull away. Gwen didn't understand her. What is this modesty and childish behavior? They're adults. They've already graduated. They're working. After another dance, the embarrassed Beatrice slipped outside, as if to get some fresh air. Gwen realized that her friend had just been frightened by her beau's pressure, so she had found an excuse to run away. Gwen had been watching the couple all evening and could see exactly what was going on. Sebastian hurried after his lady, but then Gwen got in his way, just as the slow music started to play. "Shall we dance?" Gwen smiled at the boy. It was a desperate and bold move. Actually, Gwen had never behaved like this before, but now it was as if someone was leading her by the hand. The girl suddenly felt relaxed, confident. She didn't have a shadow of doubt. Sebastian would definitely agree to dance with her. And so he did. For a moment, the boy stared at Gwen, as if trying to remember who she was. Well, of course, at the moment of acquaintance, Sebastian looked only Beatrice. He was not to others. But in the next second, the guy smiled radiantly at Gwen, which made her heart pound desperately, and her palms immediately sweat, and held out his hand to her. They danced in his arms, Gwen melting in his warm embrace. When the music stopped, he even kissed the girl. Of course, it was not the first kiss in Gwen's life, but she had never had such a reaction before. She felt dizzy and her eyes went dark. She wished Sebastian could hold her like this in his arms for the rest of her life. She didn't care if he kissed and hugged her in front of everyone. Let them look. Let them be jealous. And she didn't care what or who would think of her. "Shall we go for a walk?" Sebastian suggested in a slightly hoarse voice. Svetlana was all for it. She wanted to be alone with him too. They wandered through the city at night, holding hands tightly. Sebastian said something about himself. Then Gwen asked questions about her life. When he learned that she lived alone, he suggested without preamble that they go to her place. Gwen agreed without hesitation. In the evening and at night, Gwen played a very pleasant role for herself. The girl imagined that she and Sebastian were husband and wife, who loved each other and were going to live together all their lives. She was pleased to be near this man, to take care of him. What happiness is it to fall asleep next to the one you love? Sebastian was already asleep, but Gwen lay looking at the ceiling and savored the sensation. The warmth of a loved one, his measured breathing, silence, calmness, just the two of them. Magical. Svetlana realized that she had fallen in love. She fell in love as she had never fallen in love in her life. She didn't know she was capable of such feelings. Gwen didn't know much about Sebastian. He had managed to say that he lived in another city. Which one he didn't mention, nothing. Tomorrow will tell. Here the guy came to visit a friend. They served in the army together. He invited Sebastian as a friend of the groom, because Sebastian would be leaving soon, but now everything had changed. They met each other. Sebastian wasn't going anywhere, and if he did, he'd probably take her with him. He'd been looking at her all evening. Those looks, that spark between them, it was rare. How lucky they were to have met each other at the dance. In the morning, Gwen woke up to the sound of someone rattling pans in the kitchen. Her nose caught the scent of scrambled eggs. The girl stretched in bed and smiled, remembering the events of the previous evening. It was Sebastian. He was preparing their breakfast. How marvelous and romantic it is. Before meeting her lover, Gwen looked into the bathroom. She washed her face, smoothed her hair, just a little so it wouldn't be noticeable, touched her lips with lipstick and pinched her cheeks, causing a slight blush. She wanted to appear before Sebastian in all her glory. He had indeed cooked scrambled eggs, and they were smoking in the pan. "Good morning," he smiled. "I've been tending to your place for a while." "Is that all right?" "I was just hungry." "It's for the best." Gwen smiled radiantly. "Breakfast almost in bed. How romantic." "Well, let me take care of you." With these words, Sebastian took out a plate, deftly put a piece of scrambled eggs on it, sprinkled all this splendor with greens on top. Gwen watched his every move like a mesmerized woman. Her heart was beating joyfully in her chest. At last she met her man. And what a man! Beautiful, intelligent, attentive, caring. The young people ate breakfast in silence. Sebastian looked thoughtful. He was obviously thinking about something, and Gwen didn't want to distract him. "Thank you for the evening," he finally broke the silence. "I have to go. I have to stop by Norman's, pack my things, and get to the train station." Svetlana felt as if she'd been hit over the head with a sandbag. How come? Is he leaving already? And what about her? After all, they are so good, so cozy together. "You're leaving already?" "Yes, didn't I tell you?" Sebastian was surprised, and then suddenly he smiled his charming smile. "Yeah, well, we didn't have much time to talk last night." "I thought you were staying." "I would have stayed. You're great, really, but the train is in 3 hours and there's a lot to do." "Will I see you again?" Gwen fought hard against the tears coming to her eyes. She had already realized everything, guessed from Sebastian's look and his tone. It turned out to be an illusion of their feelings and sparks. Sebastian hadn't planned anything serious from the start. Gwen had invented an unearthly love and a fateful, chance meeting, and for him she was just another girl for a pleasant pastime, pleasant and not obliging to anything. Gwen didn't make a scene. She pulled herself together and gave herself an indifferent look. Let Sebastian guess nothing. Let him think that he was nothing more than a casual acquaintance for the evening. She didn't want to look pathetic in his eyes. Yes, Gwen cared what he thought of her, but Sebastian seemed to have noticed something. "Are you upset?" he asked sympathetically, and something like guilt seemed to flicker in his eyes. No, Gwen couldn't be angry with him. He hadn't promised her anything, hadn't lied to her. Now he seemed genuinely concerned for her. A little she smiled. "I thought we had at least another evening to spare." "You're wonderful." Sebastian kissed her on the top of the head. "If I had another day, I would have spent it with you. That's for sure, but I have to go. It was very nice to meet you." Sebastian left. He had his own life, his own plans. Already today he would be far, far away from Gwen, and probably in 2 or 3 days the guy would forget about this meeting. He was, Gwen realized now, Sebastian, not the kind of man who looked for a serious relationship. He likes to get acquainted with girls. The guy likes communication, adventure, admiration, and it's not his fault. Age is such, character, temperament. Besides, Sebastian did not lie to anyone, did not promise golden mountains. Gwen had chosen to spend the evening with him. Beatrice. She ran away when she realized what was going on. And she, Gwen, agreed to stay with Sebastian, and no regrets, by the way. Time passed. Life went back to normal. Gwen worked, met with friends, read, watched TV, and went to the cinema, went to visit her parents. All in all, she had a normal life. But now she often thought of Sebastian. She imagined how their relationship might have turned out. She also dreamed that he was out there in the big city, thinking of her too. Sebastian knows where she lives. Suddenly he would rush to her one day and say that he missed her, that he loved her, that he couldn't live without her. Of course, Gwen realized that this would never happen, but sweet dreams became so pleasant and light at heart that the girl did not deny herself in them. A month and a half later from that memorable meeting, Gwen suddenly realized that she was expecting a child. The thought pierced her like lightning right at work. One of the employees brought fish for lunch, and the smell coming from her plate, Gwen began to vomit. Yes, so much so that even in the eyes darkened. At first, Gwen tried to find an explanation for her situation. The cycle is disrupted. It's from nerves. After all, she had a hard time getting over the breakup with Sebastian. Nausea, well, also from nerves, plus the results of dieting. Gwen wanted to lose weight, so often did not finish eating, although her appetite was excellent. But a few weeks passed, and ignoring the symptoms became pointless. Gwen went to the doctor, who confirmed her fears. Pregnancy is in its 3rd month. The decision had to be made quickly, either to give birth or to get rid of the fetus. But a couple more weeks, and it would be too late to abort. Gwen was in shock at the news. Not only was she really pregnant, but she had no time to think about it, and she couldn't tell anyone. On the one hand, Gwen really wanted to become a mother. Yes, with marriage did not work out, but what if this is her last chance? She is at an age when her peers are already in full possession of children. It's time for the most, and what if the interruption will put a cross on her motherhood in the future? It happens a lot. It's scary. And then, this is a child Sebastian, beautiful, intelligent, charming man. Gwen had never met anyone like that before. The best candidate for fathers and cannot think of no, of course, Sebastian will not participate in the life of the baby. He will not even know of his existence. What's the matter with him? They will never meet again, and yet such a gene pool. If the baby turns out to be as beautiful, it's a dream come true. Gwen felt she couldn't get rid of the baby. Even with the difficulties she faced, the fate of being a single mother is unenviable. But maybe being single, with no children at all, is even worse. In general, Gwen Pamamayavshiv several days in a row made a difficult decision for herself. She leaves the child and will try her best to give the baby a good childhood. She has a profession in her hands. Her parents, if anything, will definitely help. They are loving, reliable, so the baby to be. Having determined, Gwen felt inner peace and began, finally, to really enjoy life, fully developing under her heart. At this time, Kimberly, the younger sister, graduated from graduate school, received a scientific degree. Not only that, but she had been invited to work overseas for a major research company. It was something incredible in Gwen's eyes. Kimberly, her little sister, has made it this far. She has a dizzying career ahead of her, interesting work, recognition. And she, Gwen, will soon be a single mother. Her parents talked only about their youngest daughter's impending departure. They were proud of her, proud of Kimberly again, and had no idea that their eldest daughter would soon make them happy by being a single mother without 5 minutes. Against the backdrop of her sister's success, for which Gwen was certainly very happy, her own life seemed a complete failure. Kimberly was gone. She phoned her parents and sister, occasionally sending letters in which she enclosed photographs. Kimberly had changed. There was a hardness in her face that made her even more beautiful and attractive. Beautiful, smart, a dream simple, and Gwen had her own life going on. A few months passed, and it was impossible to hide the pregnancy. At work, about everything guessed, the boss was not particularly happy that one of his shaper goes on maternity leave. Now he picked on Gwen's work in every possible way and constantly hinted to her that she would not be waiting for her at work, because a single mother would always take sick leave. Who will work then? All this disturbed Gwen. She understood the case goes to dismissal, yes, pregnant employees, carefully protects the labor law, but you can always find loopholes. That's what the boss found one day. He simply closed the outlier, ceased to exist. Accordingly, all the female employees lost their jobs, but only for one day, because the firm went bankrupt only on paper. In fact, it continued to function without stopping. The very next day, the boss hired the dressmakers back to their former positions, all except Gwen. Pregnant employees, and then single mothers with a small child were unnecessary for the boss. Gwen was left without a job and without means of livelihood. She had no savings. She didn't even have money to pay her rent. Gwen had to go back to her parents in the village and confess everything to them. Mother and father, of course, surprised to hear the story of his daughter, but not particularly upset, even seemingly on the contrary. "Don't worry, we'll get through it," soothed her father, stroking Gwen's head like a little girl. "We will not lose, not those times." "Everything will be fine," echoed the mother. "You will give birth to a child, we will help to raise it. Children are happiness." The parents didn't seem to be bothered by the upcoming difficulties or the inevitable gossip of the neighbors. Gwen understood why this was so. They had a successful youngest daughter. Even Gwen's life mistakes paled in comparison to Kimberly's achievements. On the one hand, it made life easier for the future mother. On the other hand, it made her feel even more ridiculous and stupid. As always, against Kimberly's background, Gwen was losing badly. Frustrating, painful, but familiar. Gwen's son Kyle was born at the due date. The new mother spent hours looking at his wrinkled red face, trying to see the resemblance to Sebastian. She wanted the baby to look like his father. He was just as handsome, charming, charismatic. It didn't work. Kyle didn't have those deep turquoise eyes or the open smile that made dimples form on his cheeks. A boy like a boy, short, skinny, black-haired like his grandfather. Gwen was a little hurt that her son hadn't inherited his father's spectacular looks, but it didn't affect her feelings for the kid. Gwen adored Kyle. The first time she saw her baby, she realized that from now on all her actions, her whole life, everything would be only for his sake, for the sake of this little man. While Kyle was a baby, Gwen was supported by her parents, and how else? Payments from the state are minimal, no husband, no savings too. There's no job in sight. Who needs an employee with a baby in her arms? That's how parents fed their daughter an adored grandchild. Gwen herself didn't want to sit on their backs, so as soon as the opportunity arose, she took a job as a farm laborer in the cow barn. Kyle was too young for daycare. He was left in the care of his grandparents. They did not want to see him, and Gwen decided to work. After all, her baby needs the best toys, beautiful clothes, traveling. She accepted that Kyle was growing up without a father, but the boy should not be in need because of his own mother's carelessness. The work was hard and physically exhausting. You had to work double shifts to make a good wage, but at least Gwen had money. Now she went into the city with Kyle every weekend. They sat in cafes, went on rides, went to the cinema, and of course visited toy shops. Gwen often let her son choose what he wanted: an expensive radio-controlled car, an imported constructor, huge sets of soldiers. For the sake of this, Gwen literally bent her back at work, but most importantly, a happy gleam in the eyes of the only child. You spoil him? Sometimes shook his head. Father, you cannot so. All for Kyle, you forget about yourself, and after all, young still quite. I don't need anything. Gwen shrugged her shoulders. The main thing is for my son to be happy. Son, said the father. Son should have learned to work by now. He won't wash his plate or clean his room. You and your grandmother do everything for him. You're raising a lazy boss. It's not good for a man. What are you? What are you? Immediately joined loving grandmother. Still has time to work. Let him enjoy his childhood. Gwen fully shared her mother's opinion and supported her. Father, on the arguments of women, only waved his hand and silently went out into the street. Sometimes he would say something like, "You can't be argued with." Gwen was irritated by her father's behavior, and it was only after 10 years that she realized how right he was. Blinded by her love for her only son, Gwen hadn't seen or noticed much, and now she was reaping the benefits. Kyle grew up a bright but lazy boy. At school, at first, he grasped everything quickly and was an excellent student without much difficulty. Gwen hoped he'd taken after Kimberly. She already held a post in the scientific academy, published in magazines. In general, was almost a celebrity, at least in scientific circles, certainly. But it was impossible to ride out all his school years on cleverness and memory. It was time to work, to teach, to delve into complex formulas, to make an effort. Kyle didn't want to do that at all, and problems began: twos, absences, unwillingness to go to this stupid school at all. Kyle gave a lot of arguments for the fact that in the modern world a person can get a good job and without education, and Gwen's heart was bleeding because her son was so untalented and stupidly ruining his abilities. The strict grandfather tried to educate his grandson, who had lost his hands. This time his mother and grandmother did not interfere with him. They kept aside, but it was too late. For Kyle, there were no authority figures anymore. The kid had gotten mixed up with a bad crowd. They were teenagers from not too well-off families. Gwen talked to her son a lot, tried to call him to order, but it was all in vain. Kyle was convinced that he knew best how to behave. "What can you teach me?" He questioned his mother. "You live in poverty. You don't have a decent education. You spend your life shoveling manure on the farm for pennies. Parents should bring up by example, by example, by example. You understand? I don't want to live like you. It's not much of an example. So I'm looking for other ways." Gwen had nothing to say to her rapidly growing son. All she could do was hope that everything would be all right with him. He'd grow up, he'd understand, he'd wise up. The year in which Kyle was to graduate from high school had brought Gwen many losses. First, just after New Year's Eve, her father left. He'd long had a strange cough and difficulty breathing. but wrote it off to the fact that he'd been a lifelong smoker. It turned out to be his heart. The heart attack happened in the morning. The ambulance did not even have time to bring the patient to the hospital. After his grandfather's death, Kyle went wild. The man, though elderly, had at least somehow restrained him, but now the guy had no breaks at all. He could spend nights out with his new friends, come home drunk and demand money from his mother and grandmother for fun. Kyle became rude, abrasive, a complete stranger. Neither persuasion nor threats worked on him. Gwen, who was still longing for her father, felt that she was losing her son, and only her mother gave her hope with her words that the boy would get over it. He is of such an age, he is growing up without a father. Nothing is difficult for him. He'll have to calm down. I've seen a lot of that in my time.
And indeed, by the middle of the year, Kyle had suddenly grown up. He'd just graduated high school, got his C grade. His grades were given only for his past merits, and thanks to his mother, who ran after the teachers and school administration with gifts at the end of the year.
Kyle suddenly seemed to appreciate that his mother and grandmother had done a lot for him, became more serious, even asked for forgiveness from his relatives. Gwen's heart sang, Mum was right. Kyle has changed as he's grown up. I decided to go to college, City College, to be a welder. It's a great trade, his mother and grandmother chorused in agreement. They would have been happy with any choice Kyle made. The main thing was that the boy realized the importance of education. He'd learn, he'd get a trade, he'd have a good, settled life. Kyle left, easily got into college, started an independent life in a college dormitory. Gwen breathed a sigh of relief. Everything seemed to be falling into place. And then a new blow. Her elderly mother fell ill on New Year's Eve, fever, cough. Nothing special, as if Gwen took care of her, thought the usual seasonal cold, but the old woman became worse and worse. A doctor was called. He immediately heard wheezing in the lungs. Her mother was admitted to hospital, diagnosed with bilateral pneumonia. Gwen was tense, of course, but not too frightened. Inflammation of the lungs is a serious thing. Nothing to say. But Mum was in hospital, under the care of doctors. Gwen did not think about bad things, but one morning she got a call from the hospital with terrible news. Her mum was gone. She'd had a sudden seizure during the night, and that was it. That's how in just a year Gwen lost both parents, her support, help, reliable rear. The woman felt like she'd had her footing knocked out from under her. She was left alone in this cruel world. A complicated life and a troubled teenager, Kyle. How she wished Sebastian was there for her right now. Yes, she still remembered the father of her child with fondness and love. Gwen needed a solid shoulder to lean on in this difficult situation. But there was no such person, there just wasn't. Kimberly was far away. Of course she would come for a while to say goodbye to her mother, but she would immediately drift off into her own life. She has a bright, full of events, intense, and Sebastian that, of course, and does not remember Gwen. I wonder how his life turned out. Surely he is happily married, the other and cannot be, and brings up children, not even suspecting that somewhere there is another son, so in need of attention and care of his father. Time passed. Gwen was getting used to her new life. The son left to study in the city. The woman still worked double shifts to provide Kyle with everything he needed. The guy needed to dress, eat, pay for textbooks and extra classes, and still and walk a young man needs. It was the height of his college years, after all. When if not now, and life in the city is not cheap. The son has not yet worked, so the mother tried for the only child. She bent over backwards and transferred most of her wages to Kyle. She doesn't need much herself, does she? Kyle's a different story. His life was just beginning. The woman still wanted her only child to have everything she needed. If you brought a man into this world, you'd better provide for him. It was unusual to be alone in an empty house. No one to talk to, no one to discuss the news of the day. Kyle, what? They called each other, of course, almost every night. He answered his mother's questions by saying he was fine, always in a hurry to get somewhere. An understandable youth. Gwen did not take offense, but felt often lonely and abandoned. During this period of life, the woman began to look after Jonathan, a former classmate, already a widower. He worked as a driver for the administration. Once upon a time, Jonathan ran after Gwen with flowers and compliments. It was in school. He was funny, insecure, ridiculous, anxious, and touching. Then young Gwen dreamed of other guys like Sebastian, handsome, stylish, smart. And Jonathan, he was too simple, short, puny, and wearing glasses. Of course, Gwen was pleased by the boy's attention, which, needless to say, pleased her ego, but nothing serious was out of the question.
Time passed. Jonathan had grown from an awkward teenager into a rather nice man and had married Sharon, a girl a grade below him. Gwen had been friends with her as a child. They were not close friends, but they often went out together, talked, shared secrets.
Jonathan and Sharon's family turned out to be exemplary, both quiet, hardworking, polite. It was hard to imagine either of them raising their voices at their spouse or children. Gwen was happy for her childhood friends. They had 2 heirs, a son and a daughter, as if by order. Parents raised their children, worked, went to the sea every summer. A house full of wealth, love, prosperity. Gwen, who was pulling her son without a husband, smiled at the happy couple. She was happy for Jonathan and Sharon, and a little envious of them. That would be the kind of family she wanted to build, preferably with Sebastian, but it didn't work out. But Jonathan and Sharon's happiness was short-lived. The young and seemingly healthy Sharon suddenly fell ill. She was fading, pale, thin, and weak. Jonathan took his wife to hospitals, trying to help her. They found the cause, of course, but what good was it? Some complex genetic disease that had been dormant for some time had made its debut. Doctors had given disappointing prognoses that differed by only a couple of months. Sharon could not be helped. In the end, Jonathan was left alone with 2 children in his arms. True, the son and daughter were already old enough, but still the hopeless widower was supported by the whole village. Gwen at first also cooked dinners for the orphan to the family, and then the man came to his senses and took over the household. So slowly he raised a son and a daughter. He put the children on their feet, educated them. Both were already working and living in the city. But Jonathan did not hurry to move closer to the heirs. He had elderly parents in the village, so he looked after them. When Kyle left for school, Gwen began to notice that Jonathan was around more and more often, walking her home from work, talking about this and that, or helping her carry her bags from the shop. It was as if he happened to come across her path every now and then. Gwen didn't mind the pleasant company. They discussed the news, remembered their childhood, laughed. One day Gwen invited Jonathan to tea. The man met her from work as usual and walked her to the gate. The man agreed, and at the table Jonathan finally decided to have a serious conversation. It was obvious that this step was not easy for him. "Gwen, I've always liked you, you know that." "Well, when was that?" Gwen smiled. She hadn't realized what Jonathan was getting at. She thought they were just reminiscing about their childhood again. It had been a long time ago. Jonathan agreed, and then he looked at her seriously and added, "But nothing has changed since then." Gwen looked at the man questioningly. She didn't know what to say, but the feeling from this unexpected confession was clearly pleasant. Goosebumps ran up and down her spine, and her heart warmed. "I've been fond of you since childhood, since the 6th grade. I made up my mind to admit it in high school, but you refused me then. I pretended that I didn't care. It didn't work out, and it didn't work out, but in fact I suffered then. I can't describe it. I looked at you secretly, admired you, was jealous if any of the guys were around, and dreamed that when I graduated from school I would study, become rich, and come to pick you up in a cool car. Then you wouldn't be able to resist." Gwen smiled. The confession seemed naive and very sweet. Jonathan smiled too, remembering his young and ambitious self. "But it didn't work out," he continued. "I didn't manage to go to university. I didn't have enough brains. I learned to be a driver and returned to the village. Of course, I learned about you from my acquaintances. They said you lived in the city. They said you had a boyfriend. Well, I didn't doubt it. A pretty girl like you, how could she not have admirers? They'd be queuing up." Gwen couldn't help it and laughed out loud. Jonathan, living here in the village, thought that she was surrounded by a crowd of suitors, while Gwen suffered from loneliness and was desperately jealous of her married friends. "Oh, you have no idea how wrong you were. Yes, you fool, I was young." Jonathan grinned. "Anyway, I decided that the train had finally left. You are in the city, you have a rich fiancé, gives you gifts, no need to check, and I suffered and felt my own inadequacy. Who was I? An ordinary driver, and you're a princess, a queen. an unattainable ideal. No match for me. Jonathan was in almost physical pain at the time. The girl he had been in love with since childhood would never be his. At that time, it seemed that there was nothing to live for. The guy worked and ate, met with friends. The world was gray and faded. Everything seemed meaningless, and then suddenly it turned out that the neighbor's daughter, Sharon, was partial to him, to Jonathan. It was an amazing discovery for the boy. Someone could love him for who he was, not too handsome, not too successful. Sharon had gone from skinny Sherry, an ungainly teenager, to a sweet girl. Big clear eyes, thick long hair, thin waist. Sharon graduated from teachers' college in the city and returned to her home in the small town. She taught school now, tutoring first graders. She walked briskly up to Jonathan on his way home from work that evening. She spotted her neighbor at the gate and told him to his face how she felt. I was stunned then. It was unexpected, and I felt sorry for her because I was in the same situation. I knew how much she hoped for my attention, and I knew how much she would be hurt by my indifference. How could I do that to a fragile Sharon in love? Anyway, Jonathan and Sharon started dating, getting to know each other, and realizing every day that they were a wonderful couple. I thought that nothing good was going to happen in my life, Jonathan said. Sharon. It was as if she pulled me out of my cocoon and showed me that happiness was still possible. Jonathan and Sharon married and had children. And then you came back to the village, confused, with a belly. I wanted to be your rock, your support, but it was too late. Sharon and I got married, we had babies. Did you still love me then? Gwen wondered. Of course. And now I love you too, but I couldn't show my feelings then. And I already had obligations to Sharon and the children. I loved all three of them very much already, and I couldn't betray my family even for my own happiness. Were you unhappy? Gwen was surprised. Jonathan's revelations had shaken her to the core. I can't say. Sharon was wonderful. I loved her in my own way. I cared for her. I was happy with her. But with you, I can't even now describe how I felt about you, and I still do. They sat for a while longer. Jonathan looked at Gwen, waiting for some sign from her. The woman, she didn't realize her own feelings. She was pleased that there was a man who loved her so much. A warmth developed on her soul from it. After the death of her parents, Gwen was left all alone. A son in town, a sister abroad. There were no people to care for Gwen, to try to please her, to take an interest in her well-being, after all. And then there was Jonathan, in love, devoted, good, reliable. But something was stopping Gwen. Kyle. How would he feel about this turn of events? I'm sure he won't approve. He'll say that her mother is crazy. In her old age, she's having an affair. Only the desire to be with not indifferent person. It gradually overcame. Gwen often thought about how good it would be if they lived together. Jonathan would be happy. That's for sure. And how nice it was to know that you could make someone so happy. Anyway, that night the former classmates decided to give it a go. To try being a couple. Well, I'll ask you out tomorrow, Jonathan summarized with a smile. The dream of my youth will finally come true. It will come true. Gwen nodded deliberately. The next day they went into the city. They wandered around the park, talked, sat in cafes, and then went to the cinema. During the show, Jonathan took Gwen's hand and held it for an hour and a half, until the film was over. The woman didn't mind. She liked the feeling. At last she wasn't alone. A week later, Jonathan moved in with her. Immediately he fixed the long leaking tap, tightened the hinges on all the interior doors. They were finally creak-free, and Gwen started cooking again. She was too lazy to do it for herself, but now Jonathan was with her, and the woman pleased him with delicious dishes. The only question on Gwen's mind was, how will Kyle feel about all this? He didn't know yet, did he? The son rarely came to visit his mother. They talked on the phone more and more. So Gwen was holding back, not telling Kyle about the changes that had taken place in her life. Jonathan, he immediately informed both his son and daughter. Gwen realized they were happy for their father. The woman wished her own son's reaction would be the same, but there was little hope of that. Several years passed. Gwen still hadn't decided to have a serious conversation with her son. It wasn't hard to hide the details of her personal life. Her son had little interest in what was going on with his mother. He usually only called to ask for money. But one day Kyle did come. It was amazing. It had been a long time since the son had graced his mother with his presence, and now he showed up. Hi. Gwen was both excited and a little confused. Jonathan hadn't come home from work yet, but his things were everywhere. It was impossible not to notice that someone else was living in the house. Hi, Kyle said glumly. He didn't look too shabby, pale, worried. I need money. Gwen knew immediately that something serious had happened. What's going on? She asked, clutching at her heart, something stabbing in her chest. Is there something wrong with school? I haven't studied in a while, Kyle mumbled under his breath. How? Like this. I got expelled for truancy. I've been working hard, and I can't get money from you. I sent you most of my salary every month, Gwen reminded him. It wasn't money for the city. It was nothing. Kyle sighed. I didn't have enough. So I did the best I could. Other people's parents are well off. They have cars, flats, and money for entertainment. I felt like a beggar all the time. Do you think that's nice? Gwen was hurt to hear these words. She'd spent her whole life working hard for her son. She wanted Kyle to have the best of everything, and now it turns out he feels miserable. It turns out Gwen's not doing her job as a parent, and Kyle's even out of college. So what now? Gwen asked. I got into debt. Kyle explained. I wanted to start a business to raise money, and I ended up in debt. They're charging me a lot of money, threatening to kill me. Where am I going to get it? So I came to you for help. Son, you know I don't have anything. What do you mean, you don't have anything? Kyle was surprised. What about this house? What do you want us to do? Sell the house? Well, what's the solution, Mom? I'll pay off my debts, we'll rent a flat together, we'll live in the city. Why? Are you going to take a well-deserved holiday soon? There's no couch in town, of course, but I'll get you a job in an outlier. My grandmother told me that you used to be a dressmaker, and now this labor pays well. We'll live together in the city, you and me like we used to be. Wouldn't that be nice? Gwen couldn't agree with her son. A couple of years ago, she would have happily supported Kyle's idea. Living alone in an empty house was unbearable, but now that she had Jonathan, they were good together. It was nice to have a loving, understanding person around. So what now? Kyle finally noticed the men's things in the rooms. Jonathan's jacket hung on the wall, his trousers were on the chair, and his size 43 trainers were by the front door. What's that? Kyle asked, looking at his mother in amazement. Did you have someone? I've been wanting to tell you for a long time. I've had this happen here. I see. He shook his head and sighed sadly. You're getting on with your life. Yes, of course you don't have a son to worry about. You know I'm not. Gwen objected softly. She could see that Kyle was depressed and troubled. He needed help, and she, the mother, would certainly lend her shoulder to him in his time of need. Who else would? Son, I'll do whatever you say. And Gwen did. She sold the house, gave most of the proceeds to her son. Used the rest to buy a tiny flat on the outskirts of town, in an old house. Jonathan, he'd suggested options, wanted to give Kyle into his savings. There was less than he needed, but it still turned out to be a fairly decent amount. Gwen didn't agree. Jonathan shouldn't have to solve her problems, their problems. He had children of his own. Using a man in this situation is despicable. Stay with me, Jonathan pleaded with her. Gwen had already packed her things at that time. The suitcases stood in the hay and waited for tomorrow morning. Kyle had booked a taxi for his mother by 10 a.m. You know I can't. I know, but I don't understand. You gave him money, you bought him a place to live, but why would you want to be there? Stay with me. I've got a big house, plenty of room, you know. We had a good time together, didn't we? We were. Gwen agreed. Yes, in the few years that they had lived with Jonathan, the woman had become accustomed to warmth, care, acceptance. It was very pleasant. They would go out together in the evenings, discuss things. Jonathan looked at Gwen with loving eyes and she felt happy, but now everything was different. Gwen saw that her son was not well, too anxious, too restless. There was clearly something not good going on in his life. Yes, Kyle is an adult. Jonathan is partly right when he says that he should deal with his own problems. But when Gwen was in a difficult situation, she didn't deal with her own problems. Her parents had helped her a lot. Jonathan assured her that it was a different story. A young, single woman with a baby in her arms and a grown man who had been given money from the sale of her house by her mother. Gwen couldn't agree with him. It's fine for him to talk. He's got both his son and daughter retired, working good jobs with families. There was no telling how Jonathan would sing if one of his children was in a situation like Kyle's. And Gwen was also elementally afraid of losing her last place to live. Now that she didn't have the home she had spent her childhood in, the woman began to worry about old age. It wouldn't be long before she would be elderly and possibly helpless. How would she be without a corner of her own if Kyle couldn't be looked after? I mean, he's going to lose that flat in the old building too. Anyway, we need to find out what's going on in his life. Maybe it's time to save his son. He himself will not confess, but when they start living together, Gwen will understand everything, will see everything herself. She cannot leave her only child alone with his problems and troubles. Why are you so worried? Gwen smiled at Jonathan. The smile came out sad, the woman realized, even without a mirror. I'm not moving to the moon or even to another continent. The city is near. Distance is not an obstacle to feelings. We'll meet, communicate. Of course we will, Jonathan sighed, but you know it's not the same thing. What can you do? It's just the way life is. Gwen moved to the city and started to organize her new home with enthusiasm. There was only one room in the flat, and it went, of course, to Kyle, and Gwen settled in the kitchen. She bought a cot, which she put by the window at night and put away in the pantry in the morning. Jonathan, he came often at first. They walked along the seafront as before, sat in cafes. With him, Gwen felt invaluable, important, loved, not like at home. Jonathan urged her to move in with him. Well, you do not want to come to me. Let's go somewhere else, rent a flat, start life anew, try. But Gwen couldn't leave her son now. After living with him for a while, the woman realized Kyle had a serious drinking problem. He drank a lot, came home in the morning. His mother did not sleep, worried about what could happen to a drunken son at such a time, beat someone or hit by a car, or even taken to the police. Then, strange as it may sound, Gwen got used to it. Kyle's nocturnal escapades no longer bothered her so much, they became routine. Her son would sleep until dinner, and then he would be sick, and then the caring mother would bring her son pills in time, give him mineral water, clean up after him. Without her, he probably won't survive. Because the disease progressed, Kyle drank more and degraded literally before her eyes, becoming stupid, aggressive, helpless. Gwen blamed herself. Who else could she blame? It was her fault that Kyle's childhood had been spent without a father. What is it like for a child, especially a boy, to grow up without a male example in front of his eyes and without a father's care? And Kyle was born to a man Gwen didn't know at all. Maybe that handsome Sebastian was an alcoholic or one of his relatives? Gwen thought that addiction to alcohol was often passed down through genes, and now Kyle was suffering because of her, because of his careless, stupid mother. Gwen tried her best to make her son's existence easier, feeding him on her own money and generally becoming a servant for Kyle. He did nothing at all around the house, only demanded. Gwen realized that Kyle didn't hold down any jobs because of his drinking habits. Of course, who wants an employee who can go on a bender at any time? Before the man started living with his mother, he was still trying to get his head round, and then he relaxed. Indeed, why bother if you are not going to be hungry anyway? His mother bought groceries and cooked delicious lunches and dinners of several dishes. Kyle didn't bother to work. After a while, the son began to demand money from his mother when he did not have enough for a drink, and it happened quite often because the man earned a living by rare part-time jobs, which were not every day. The soul demanded hot drinks on a regular basis. Gwen, feeling sorry for her son, at first gave him money for pocket money, and then she tried to stop giving him money, but Kyle still took her relatives' money. Sometimes he slowly took money out of his mother's purse, Sometimes he got his way by threats and rudeness. Gwen felt miserable and confused. Life with her own son had become a nightmare. Kyle could yell at his mother, sass her at the drop of a hat. He took her money, so the woman tried, having received payment, immediately make a stock of food for a long time. The adult son had not yet raised his hand on his elderly parent, but looking into Kyle's empty, embittered eyes, Gwen realized that the moment was not far off. The only outlet for Gwen was walks with Jonathan. He still visited her in town whenever he could. The woman didn't tell him about her life. It was embarrassing, hard, and she couldn't share it with anyone. In front of others, Gwen put on the mask of a prosperous and quite happy woman. One day, Jonathan gave Gwen news that made her heart ache. "I'm moving soon," he said, looking away. "We won't be able to see each other much." Unfortunately, where Gwen gasped. Lately, she'd only felt human around Jonathan, and now it looked like their meetings were about to end. "To the sea, to Florida," he answered. "With my son's family. You know I have lung problems. The doctor advised me to change the climate otherwise. Well, never mind. My son decided to move with me too. My daughter is still thinking about it, but it looks like she'll decide too. So that's it." "Oh, that's a shame." Gwen was upset. She tried to fight the tears that came treacherously to her eyes. "I'm really going to miss you. Gwen, I'm begging you so much, come with me. You helped your son to solve problems when he was in a difficult situation. Now he will swim out on his own and not a little one in you. We will live by the sea. Just imagine what happiness it is. Think about it." Gwen realized that she wouldn't go anywhere. How would she leave her son? Jonathan just didn't know anything about Kyle's addiction, or the fact that he hadn't been earning much for a long time. Without his mother, Kyle would be lost, completely lost. And how could she enjoy the sea, the sun, and the company of a loving Jonathan, knowing that her son was dying alone in a distant city? Jonathan was gone. Gwen took his absence hard. They called each other, corresponded of course. Jonathan sent pictures of marvelous landscapes and still called Gwen to him. He described how good they would be together, but the woman felt responsible for her son. She gave birth, did not give the appropriate upbringing, so she should be near, help, support. Sometimes because of these thoughts the woman felt terrible, but she could not do anything about it. A few more years passed. Gwen had grown old. She probably could have looked better and younger, but not with this life. Kyle continued to drink and adamantly refused treatment. He started taking company home, and it was much harder than when Gwen waited nights for her son. These people, marginal-looking women, downcast men, laughed loudly in Kyle's room, drank, swore, even fought sometimes. When Gwen tried to reason with her son, he snapped at her. He stopped seeing his mother as a person altogether, and then Marion, Kyle's common-law wife, showed up at the flat. There was no hope that she would have a positive effect on her son. Marion was a drinker herself. While Kyle usually didn't touch his mother, except when he needed money, Marion clung to Kyle's mother on and off. Eventually, she'd managed to turn Kyle against Gwen, too. He was now convinced that his mother intended to break him up with his beloved and hated Marion in general. Scolding, quarrels, scandals, all this now waited for Gwen every day, and her son was not saved, and with Jonathan, personal happiness did not build, but could now live with a man who loved her all her life on the beach. It's a fairy tale. But what about Kyle, without her supervision? No, she gave a man life. She's got to take responsibility for him now. I guess that's her lot in life. The rain had eased considerably, and Gwen took advantage of the respite to get to the driveway. This time she was in a hurry, in case it rained again. She couldn't wait to get back, but she had nowhere to go. Looks like Marion and Kyle are having company again tonight. They'll be hanging out in the only room till morning, and they'll be going to the kitchen to the fridge. Gwen's just about to fill it up with groceries, which will be great. Tomorrow we'll probably have to go to the shop again, if there's any money left. Gwen will lie on her cot all night, pretending to sleep, and listen to the sounds of the merry party in the next room. Her main task now is not to disturb her son, Marion, and their guests. When she reached her floor on foot, as there had never been a lift in this old house, the old woman stopped at the door like a stumbling block. On the landing were her suitcases, the same ones she'd moved here with from the village. Gwen opened one of them. There lay her belongings, nothing incomprehensible. The woman tried to open the door with her key, no luck. Someone had snapped the lock so it wouldn't open from the outside. So Gwen knocked loudly. The bell hadn't worked for a long time. The door swung open, and there stood Marion, happy, arms at her sides, feet shoulder-width apart. She was smiling strangely. "What's the matter?" Gwen asked. "You're moving out," you old hag, Marion said in a luscious voice. "This is my flat. Why would I want to leave?" "It's not yours, it's Kyle's, it's registered to him. I saw the paperwork myself the other day. You're a nobody, so get out of here." Kyle's head peeked out from behind Marion. "Yeah, Mum, we've decided that you need to leave. You don't give us a life, you're always sticking your nose in our business, giving us advice. And you're trying to get Marion and me to break up, so we'd better get our own place. And what are you going to live on?" Gwen did not understand. She has long realized that her son does not have any warm feelings for her, but he needed his mother at least as a source of funding. "You don't know anything." Marion smirked. "I'm expecting a baby I'm due in a couple of months. I've already got sick pay, maternity pay, and then every month for the baby, so we're in the clear." Gwen looked at her sister-in-law's figure. Yes, her belly did stand out under the dirty sweatshirt, but Marion had never been particularly slim, so the woman didn't notice anything. "That's news to me. Kyle and Marion are having a baby, poor baby. What's it like growing up with parents like that? And will that baby even survive?" Gwen's eyes darkened at the news. The news of the baby overshadowed even the fact that she was being kicked out of her own home. She felt unbearably sorry for this unborn baby, grandson or granddaughter. At the same time, the woman realized that she was unable to save him, to make his life even a little easier. She would have to deal with her own fate. "So get out of here," Marion smiled again. "Son, where am I supposed to go?" Gwen turned to Kyle. "You can't live on the street. You have a lover in the village, go to him." Kyle waved her off carelessly. "You've got somewhere to go. Don't be poor." Of course, Kyle didn't know that Jonathan had moved to Florida, but he'd never been interested in his mother's affairs. "And you have a rich sister. She won't leave you," Marion added and slammed the door shut. Gwen picked up her suitcases and went outside. What else could she do? She had no idea where to go. Jonathan was far away, Sister Kimberly even farther away. No one wanted her, alone, abandoned. Now she was homeless. She must have deserved it somehow. "I'm ashamed to even tell people I know how life has turned out." Native son, for whom her mother only lived and kicked out of the house. Gwen walked for a long time wherever she looked. The rain had stopped, but there was a piercing icy wind. It burned her cheeks and made her eyes water. It was darkening rapidly. There were hardly any people on the streets. Gwen was finally exhausted. She put her suitcases near an empty bus stop, sat on them, and let the tears flow. They poured down her cheeks, and the woman didn't even wipe her face. She wept for her unfulfilled hopes for her son. She wept for Kyle's plight and her unborn grandson. Well, and her own future, of course, caused anxiety and apprehension. Where to go, who to ask for help. Staying outside on a cold November night is a pleasure. "What's the matter with you?" A pleasant young girl's voice came from somewhere behind her. Gwen turned round sharply. A young woman was looking at her. Tall, skinny, tight jeans, trainers, a deep hooded sweatshirt and eyes, attentive, sympathetic eyes. Next to the stranger, a small, funny-looking pug was worrying. He whined amusingly and seemed to be looking at Gwen with sympathy too. His alien, sympathetic face looked so funny that the older woman couldn't help but smile through her tears. Rachel was born into a student family. Her mom was an economist, her dad an engineer. The young parents met at a student disco. They immediately noticed each other, then fell in love and got married. Rachel was born when both were in their 4th year, each at their own university. The young family was not discouraged. Yes, they earned little. Yes, they had to live with a child in a cramped room in the student dormitory, but ahead of the couple had so much. They dreamed, planned, hoped. Rachel did not remember her parents at all, saw their photos, listened to the stories of relatives and acquaintances about these people. That's how the image of her mother and father formed in her head. Cheerful, energetic, working, a little naive, loving each other and the child. Tragedy struck at a construction site. Rachel's mother and father, trying to earn an extra penny after their studies and main job, were looking for a part-time job. That time they managed to get a job with a private contractor who was building a sports complex in the city center. Young spouses together with a couple of similar students painted the walls. And something happened. Either the cable broke or the platform failed. All in all four of them fell from a height right onto the concrete floor. No one survived. There was no chance. The owner of the construction site managed to get away with it. The students worked for him unofficially, and he made it look as if the young people had sneaked into his construction site to take extreme photos or something like that. A friend of her parents, the family's dormitory neighbor, was babysitting little Rachel at the time. The girl spent a few days with her. Then she was supposed to be taken to an orphanage, but her father's sister, Aunt Scarlett, turned up. She lived in the country, raising her 3 children alone. She wasn't poor, but her family wasn't exactly wealthy. An extra mouth in the form of a niece orphaned overnight was a burden to Aunt Scarlett. But what could she do? What would people say? Abandoned her brother's daughter, sent the child to an orphanage. The neighbors will turn on her. They'll remember it for the rest of their lives, and their conscience will bother them. That's how Rachel ended up with Aunt Scarlett's family. The girl's childhood was, at first glance, the most ordinary. Rachel helped her aunt with the household chores, along with her children. She played outside, went to school with her friends, but no birthdays with a lot of friends and a cake with candles, no new beautiful dresses, trips to the amusement park. And what is their dresses? Rachel lacked the banal warmth hugs, affectionate words of support. Aunt Scarlett was not strict or angry, but she was not in a hurry to surround her nephew with love and care. Aunt Scarlett looked at them differently, stroked their heads, hugged them, and found tender words for them. Rachel, she always felt like a stranger to her aunt, and as she grew older she realized she was a burden to Aunt Scarlett. Growing up with the realization of her own irrelevance was hard. The girl sometimes felt sorry for Aunt Scarlett. She was so tired at work and with her own children, and then her niece fell on her head. Rachel dreamed of growing up and having a family of her own. There she would be loved and appreciated for real. Rachel always spent a lot of time studying. Firstly, she liked to learn new things, and the girl did it well. She was an excellent student all the years. Secondly, Rachel understood that education is her only chance for a prosperous life. The girl wanted to leave the village, to settle in the city, to travel the world. For all this she needed money, so she tried. After school, Rachel entered the university as a translator. She was given a dormitory, and her free life began. At last, she wasn't a burden to anyone. Rachel did not pay attention to boys in her youth. She firmly decided for herself, first her career, then everything else, but in the last year of her studies she accidentally met Oliver. He was 8 years older. An accomplished, self-confident, handsome, intelligent man stopped by the university to talk to the rector. Oliver had his own travel agency. He needed intelligent interpreters, and they bumped into each other near the rector's office. Literally bumped into each other. Oliver swung the doors open and took a step into the corridor and crashed into Rachel, who was walking past. The man immediately picked the girl up, preventing her from falling, and began to apologize. Rachel assured him with a smile that she was fine, amused by the man's consternation. He acted as if he hadn't accidentally hit her with his shoulder, but had almost hit her with a car, and then, like a corny scene from a novel, their eyes met, and Rachel's breath caught. Oliver felt something too. There was a spark between the young people. Anyway, they went to the window and talked for a long time. They exchanged phone numbers, of course, and in the evening he picked Rachel up and they went for a walk around the city. The girl herself chose such a format of the first date. Rachel-Oliver's relationship, Rachel-Oliver, quickly became close and very serious. Soon the girl moved to his flat, a spacious 3-room flat in the city center. At first the girl was frightened and confused by the fact that her chosen one is so rich. He has his own travel agency, a beautiful car, an expensive flat. And she is a girl from the village, without a yard even her parents do not have. An orphan from Kazan, but Oliver was not embarrassed by all this. He looked at Rachel with admiring eyes, showered her with gifts and compliments. The girl saw that her very presence made him happy and finally allowed herself to just be happy and not worry about anything. After a while, Rachel realized that she was expecting a child. She was confused, of course, because everything was too quick and unplanned. Oliver was genuinely happy. His business was doing well, his capital was increasing, and his business was developing. "Children are happiness," the man smiled, stroking Rachel's still quite flat tummy. Rachel thought that after the news of her pregnancy, Oliver would finally propose to her, but he was in no hurry to propose. When she herself asked him about it when they would legitimize their relationship, Oliver was genuinely surprised. Why would that be? Well, as the child should have a full family, mom, dad. That, the child I recognize legally, do not doubt, and the stamp in the passport. These are such conventions. You know, I was married, and the relationship went sour just after the official marriage. Then there was so much trouble with reissuing documents and so on. So I'm against such conventions. The statement of her beloved then shook Rachel, but she coped with herself and accepted Oliver's point of view. Indeed, it does not matter whether there is a stamp in the passport, the main thing that they love each other. Catherine was born on her due date and made Rachel the happiest person on earth. The young mom couldn't look at her daughter and didn't understand where such a miracle had come from. Oliver was not a very attentive father. In general, since the birth of the child, he became somehow distant. Only Rachel, blinded by the new happiness of motherhood, did not immediately notice it. One day, Catherine was then only 2 years old. The man said that he was leaving. "I leave the flat to my daughter. I will support her all her life and communicate with the child too. But with you, I can no longer live. I'm sorry, I fell out of love. I met someone else. It happens." Oliver left, leaving Rachel in upset feelings. She felt like half her heart had been ripped out of her chest. She'd loved Oliver so much, she'd hoped they'd be okay. She had to adjust to the new reality. Oliver wasn't lying. He left the flat to his daughter and correctly transferred the alimony for her maintenance. But the woman understood that she had to urgently find a source of income. Oliver's money, they were only for the daughter. Rachel needs to work, need to be in the profession. As practice showed, in this life, one has to rely only on oneself. Rachel realized that, in general, she was still very lucky. Oliver left his daughter a flat and remitted child support. It was a small amount of money, but it was still a pain in her chest. The pain of the breakup was not going away, and the future seemed very vague. It is necessary to go to work, but it so happened that Rachel immediately after university gave birth to a daughter and therefore did not have time to get a job, and now, with a small child in her arms, and without experience, who needs her? Rachel has no relatives, no mom, no sister, no grandmother, no one who could look after Catherine while her mother is at work. Send the child to a kindergarten, but Catherine will be sick a lot there. The employer is unlikely to like an employee who does not get out of sick leave. The situation seemed hopeless. That November evening, Rachel was just thinking about her future. She was thinking about how she could get a job. There was not enough money to live on. She had to deny herself everything. She couldn't and wouldn't ask Oliver for more money. He left them a whole flat and gives them money to support their daughter. And if Rachel couldn't provide for herself, it was her problem. She's not a child anymore, she's an adult. At this point, Princess the pug that Oliver had given Rachel once, when everything was still good with them, the dog was asking to go outside. What a bad time. It's dark and cold and there are puddles all around. The rain had recently let up, but where to go? Princess can't wait. Catherine has already slept in her room. She will wake up only in the morning. So Rachel can calmly walk the dog. The girl quickly dressed, attached the collar at Princess' leash, and went out into the straight November evening. The old woman sitting on the suitcases near the bus stop Rachel noticed from afar and could not believe her eyes. It looked too strange. She approached and looked closely and realized that the old woman was very upset about something. She was crying quietly, not even noticing that her face was already wet with tears. Rachel's heart squeezed with pity for a stranger who was obviously in great distress. "What's wrong? Do you need help?" When she heard Gwen's story, Rachel was horrified. She had longed for a mother, for a close relative. She couldn't imagine how Kyle could do this to her mum, her own mum. Rachel hadn't hesitated for a second in making that offer. The words came out of her mouth before she had a chance to think them through. "Come to my place now, you're very cold. You need a mug of hot tea, you can't stay outside." A year had passed since that meeting. Gwen went to live with Rachel. On that cold, dark evening, over a cup of hot tea, a decision was formed that suited both parties to the unusual story. Gwen now looked after the house and enjoyed chatting with Catherine, who loved her new grandmother. Rachel calmly went to work, knowing that her little girl was in safe and loving hands. Next to Rachel, finally there was a person who loved and cared for her, Gwen. And she was getting the maternal warmth she had missed all her life. But her daughter now had a wonderful grandmother who would entertain, feed, and teach. Kyle showed up. One day he found out somehow where his mother lived. He demanded Gwen come home, appealed to her sense of family. "What, you care about strangers more than your own son?" "It happens." Gwen shook her head. "I know that now. Sometimes strangers are closer than family, and Rachel and I aren't strangers anymore." Kyle kicked Marion out. Their baby was never born. Marion, being pregnant, was not going to give up her bad habits, so naturally her body couldn't take it anymore. The baby was born prematurely. It was a very weak and painful boy. He did not survive. Plans of the parents of the unfortunate crumb on the allowance from the state hit a snag, so Kyle came crawling to his mother. He needed her money again. He still didn't want to work. But this time, Gwen was firm. No. Jonathan was right. Her son was a grown man. She'd done more than she could for him. She'd sold her only home so he could buy a flat in the city and pay his debts. Let him take it from there. Speaking of Jonathan, Gwen did tell him her story. She got over herself, she was immediately relieved, and Jonathan finally understood her. He came to Gwen's house, met Rachel and Catherine. All four of them got along very well. It was a nice group of people, heartfelt. Catherine even began to call Jonathan grandfather, but he did not object. On the contrary, it was obvious that he enjoyed it. "I invite all three of you to visit me this summer," Jonathan said before leaving. "No refusal is accepted." "No refusal is planned." Gwen smiled. Jonathan left. Summer is coming. Rachel and Gwen are making plans for a wonderful holiday in Florida, with Jonathan and his whole family waiting for them. It's going to be a wonderful holiday, and who knows, maybe they'll move to Florida during the holidays and see what's what. Rachel's going to try and get a job and have a holiday and get to know the area. They could do it. And why? Living by the sea, surrounded by people you love and love you, isn't that happiness?
People often meet unexpectedly, but these meetings influence future events and sometimes turn the whole life around. Something like this happened to Elizabeth. Elizabeth and her sister Leslie, who was 2 years older than her, lived with their grandmother. The grandmother was not that old, still working, and was the guardian of the girls, who had been orphaned by a tragic accident. The family lived in the suburbs. The girls' father worked as a tractor driver, their mother as a cook at the school. One day in the fall, the father was loading hay and left some in the loader to bring to lunchtime for his animals. The weather was lovely that day. The sun was shining gently. The breeze was touching the body tenderly, and it was so calm and pleasant on the soul that John, the girl's father, felt such happiness, such joy in life that he wanted to sing. His life turned out well. After the army, he met Maddie, and she seemed so desirable to him that he could not imagine life without her. Her fluffy hair, affectionate look, malleability fell into his soul from the first meeting. Soon they got married. When John drove into the yard, Maddie was tending to a calf. John suddenly wanted to play a joke on Maddie, so he decided to pile the fragrant hay right at Maddie's feet. But at that moment, something happened to the hoist, and it crashed down on the poor woman and the calf. Maddie didn't even have time to cry out. The impact was on her head. John, white as a wall, got off the tractor in a flash. When he saw the terrible picture, he howled like a wounded animal. Clutching his head and biting his bloody lips, John was mad with grief. His eyes rested on the rope with which the calf was tied. The solution came instantly. The only thought drilling into his brain was, "What have I done? How can I live without her? I can't. The neighbor, hearing some incomprehensible sounds, John's heartbreaking scream, rushed to the neighbor's yard. But it was too late. What she saw so shocked her that she almost fainted. That day the girls were orphaned. Leslie was 6 years old and Elizabeth was 4. 12 years had passed. Leslie, an 18-year-old girl, is in culinary school. Very attractive, tall, with dark hair and big brown eyes, she resembles her father. Elizabeth is 16 years old, graduating from high school. A calm, balanced girl, she studies well and dreams of entering the University of Chemical Technology. Elizabeth, like her mother, with blue eyes, fluffy hair, short, with surprisingly beautiful proportions of the body. Both brought up in strictness, for which we must give credit to their grandmother Aubrey, who devoted the rest of her life to these girls. She was widowed early and had a hard time. The money she earned and received for the children was often not enough. She had to live modestly, on a shoestring. Elizabeth was rarely bought new things, mostly left from her older sister, but she did not hold a grudge. The girl often dreamed that she would finish school, will work, buy herself everything, and even be able to surprise her grandmother and sister with gifts. Leslie has already been taking care of guys. Elizabeth sometimes saw how happy Leslie was after a date. She herself would be 17 soon, and none of the boys would even come near her. She began to look in the mirror more often and was always dissatisfied with her appearance. It seemed to her that she had a long nose, inexpressive eyes, and for some reason very fluffy eyelashes, and lips in general small and chubby, like a child. Classmates have already met with guys and often met at recess. Elizabeth saw this and felt somehow insecure. She did not understand how you can share with friends personal experiences. The girl read a lot. It should be said that the books of that time, as well as programs on television, were subjected to a fairly strict censorship. In the masses came out literature, which was supposed to bring up a highly spiritual, morally stable citizen. Fiction publications spoke more about the beautiful side of love, duty, respect. Elizabeth was brought up on this. This is how she imagined her future love, and knew that between a man and a woman there should be a bright feeling that will bind them for life. But it hadn't happened to her yet, and she waited with hope for the meeting, which, it seemed to her, should be happy, special, and for life. The spring of 1970 came. Prepared for the holiday on March 8. In the school where Leslie studied were to come to the conscript soldiers with amateur art, congratulate the girls on International Women's Day. Leslie and her friend with excitement going to this event. They put on their best dresses, giggled, and tweaked their bangs. Leslie applied snowflake foundation to her face and became even more attractive. Elizabeth watched them and was a little envious. Angelica, Leslie's girlfriend, seeing Elizabeth, suddenly suggested, "Let's take Elizabeth with us. Will you come with us, Elizabeth? Can we?" Leslie said she had to ask her grandmother, but grandmother was not at home, and the girls decided to take Elizabeth with them without asking. She was quickly dressed, painted her face, lips, and went to the school. In the foyer there were already a lot of people. Soldiers in neutered uniforms with white collars, polished buttons, cut and shaved, seemed to be an example of decency and imitation. Music was blaring. Dressed-up girls, giggling, stood aside. Soon the hosts opened the evening. The soldiers sang in chorus, recited poems, played guitar and accordion. Elizabeth liked the guy who sang a song about his mother. He was of medium height, very handsome, and had an excellent voice, and the song was so heartfelt. Everyone clapped for a long time and asked him to sing an encore. Then the guys played wind instruments and started dancing to live music. It was so beautiful and solemn. Elizabeth watched her sister twirling with the tall guy, Angelica laughing with the surgeon. She had already decided that it was time for her to leave, that no one would invite her. She felt sad and bored at this party. Suddenly someone in a warm voice said to her, "May I invite you?" Elizabeth stood there with her eyes wide open in disbelief. In front of her was the same guy who sang about Mom. Slightly embarrassed, she said yes, and then she first felt the man's hand on her waist. Inside everything was somehow squeezed. It was scary and pleasant to feel the warmth of a strong hand. Elizabeth danced easily. She felt the music. Her soul sang. And the guy looked at her directly, and she was embarrassed by this look. If she had not been so innocent, she would have realized that the look was insolent. That evening, Elizabeth danced only with him. He pulled her tighter and tighter against him, and she thought that was the way it was, embarrassed to say she was uncomfortable. At the end of the evening, they met. "Jack," he said, and shook her hand firmly. "Elizabeth," she replied. He asked for her address. She gave it. And so she received her first letter, in which Jack explained his feelings, asked for a date when he went on furlough. Elizabeth read the letter, and her heart beat harder. It was so exciting. anxious and joyful at the same time. The girl gave her consent. Elizabeth was overwhelmed by feelings. And look, it affected her grades. One day in chemistry class, the teacher noticed. "Elizaveta, if you have not changed your mind to enter chemical engineering, you need to pull up." And Elizabeth was busy dreaming about Jack. He wrote often, and every time it seemed to her that everything was he. She had met her great love for life. In class, she was often seen smiling distractedly. At home, too, Elizabeth's moods were noticed. Grandma got worried, but Leslie calmed her down. "The guy will soon serve. To demobile 4 months left, and we'll go home. It's a piece of cake." And so he came on a date. It is impossible to convey in words what Elizabeth felt after the first kiss. It was so sweet and so eager to do it again that she let Jack kiss her hands, her lips, her neck. Sometimes she shook with a small tremor, a state that the boy liked very much. "Will you marry me?" "I have to go to school," was the answer. "But it's such a long wait, and my demob is soon." "Let's go to my place. We'll have a wedding, and you'll study by correspondence." "I'll have to think about it," said Elizaveta. "Please think about it," Jack asked. Elizabeth never thought about the final outcome of the meetings. In the evening, reading Jack's next letter of confession, she didn't know what she should do. She understood that it was too early to marry, that she had to study, but remembering their meetings, the feelings she had experienced, she was afraid that Jack would go away, leave her and marry someone else, and no one would ever look at her again, that no one would want her. She remembered how he sang a song about her mother, whom, of course, he loved very much. Elizabeth did not know motherly love, did not have time to feel it. Grandmother was always in business, strict in upbringing, loved the girls in her own way. She was like a dictator in the family. Everyone obeyed her will. I am an adult, so Elizabeth thought, and I could do whatever I want, not my grandmother. At the next meeting with Jack, Elizabeth was thoughtful and silent. "I'm 3 weeks away from Dima," he said. "Make up your mind. I'm waiting for your consent." "I don't know," Elizabeth said, "because somehow you get married and then you get married. You know very well that it is impossible." Yes, Elizabeth knew that Jack lived in a village somewhere in Alaska, that he had 3 brothers and 2 older sisters. When he finished the 8th grade, he went to school as a mechanic, but did not graduate because he had a fight with the teacher. Then for 2 years he lived at a log cabin in the forest with his grandfather and was drafted into the army in a construction battalion. Elizabeth in his youth and naivety did not give it all meaning and saw only light in his biography. In fact, Jack did not really wait for Elizabeth's consent. He easily got acquainted with girls, but seeing the softness of Elizabeth, decided that with such a wife will be easy to live. She is young, does not know people well, life and wealth has not seen, and besides loves him, and therefore will forgive a lot. And Jack also wanted to prove to Leslie, her name was exactly the same as Elizabeth's sister's, which made it even more unpleasant, his ex-girlfriend, who had not waited for him and married someone else, how good he was. He had found such a young one, such a beauty. Let Leslie curl up with anger and envy. Jack's family really lived in a village 200 kilometers from the district center. The village was located in the forest. To get to it in the fall and spring on the off-road was almost impossible. The inhabitants mainly lived by fishing for pine nuts, kept livestock. Jack's family led a dissolute life. Father, mother, and their close relatives liked to go on a bender for 56 days. The children were practically neglected. The older sisters had married several times, which was not common in those years, and both had 2 children from different marriages. They all lived together in one hut. One of the brothers was serving in the army for the first year. The other 2 were hanging around the village, doing nothing, and could have a good drink on any good occasion. Quarrels and fights were common in the family. Everyone talked without hesitation. This was the atmosphere to which Jack had decided to bring Elizabeth, who had no idea of such a life. Time passed and the demobilization drew near. Jack had written only 3 letters home during his service and received one. He was not allowed to go on leave because of his misconduct and bad service. A fellow soldier, knowing Jack's attitude, wanted to tell Elizabeth about her lover, his behavior in the army, and everything he knew about the family. But the circumstances were such that he could not meet Elizabeth. Meanwhile, Elizabeth successfully passed her exams, received her certificate, and decided to enroll. And with Jack wanted to agree not to hurry with the wedding. Elizabeth rode in the train, having handed in the documents for admission to the university. The mood was just fine. Someone sat down next to her. She turned around and saw Jack. What a coincidence. Her soul just sang. He took her in his arms and kissed her with feeling. The neighbors murmured disapprovingly. In those years such behavior was condemned. Young people had to restrain their feelings. Elizabeth became uncomfortable. Feeling awkward, she asked in a whisper, "Why did you do it?" "I have already served," he announced cheerfully. "Tonight is our train. We go together. I decided so. I love you and I can't be without you." "But She had no time to say anything before he covered her mouth with a sweet kiss. "I don't want to know anything. Or don't you love me?" "I do," she whispered softly. "I have to tell my grandmother and sister, and I have entrance exams in a month and a half. You're an adult with your own life, and you can study by correspondence. Let's get off at La Connor, and then we'll go to yours and explain everything." They rode to La Connor with their arms around each other, no longer embarrassed by the other passengers. In La Connor, they went to a cafe at the station, both of them hungry. The waitress was looking at Elizabeth carefully. Once again, approaching the table, she asked Jack, "What about Sylvester?" "It's all gone," Jack replied. "And Sylvester is who?" "Sylvesterto." "Yes, it's a friend in the service," Elizabeth heard back. The waitress shook her head and did not approach again. "I have to go out for a while. Wait for me, okay?" Jack asked and kissed Elizabeth. When he returned, Elizabeth saw a glint in his eyes and a satisfied smile. "Have you been drinking? Why?" "I'm happy. I've done my service. And you're there for me? What's the occasion?" "Come on, I'll introduce you to someone." They went out, and after a block they came to a ground floor apartment in a 5-story building. Jack had the key to the apartment. Explaining that a friend had left the key, he opened the door. The room was uncomfortable, with a musty odor. Jack offered to come in, but said he would put the kettle on and lock the door. Elizabeth was wary. Something told her to run away, that this was no place for you. Jack came out in a t-shirt, put his arms around Elizabeth and drew her to the sofa, kissing her and saying affectionate words. Elizabeth knew almost nothing about this side of love. They didn't talk about such things at home. And at school, the girls never went further than kissing. Suspecting nothing, Elizabeth was calm. But suddenly he threw her on the couch, and the airy skirt of the dress was not a big obstacle. Elizabeth felt a sudden pain. She felt sick, realized what had happened, and cried to her heart's content. In the kitchen, the kettle hissed. Jack lay contentedly sprawled on the sofa. Elizabeth shrank into a ball and looked at the mirror hanging over the sofa, noting the swollen face from tears and the darkened patches of skin on his neck and lips from kisses. It was creepy and disgusting to see herself like this, and how she would tell her grandmother and sister about it, she dreaded to think. Jack looked at his watch and fidgeted. It was 7 hours before the train arrived. "Get up and get cleaned up," he commanded. "Hurry to yours, get your clothes and money. Let's go." Elizabeth imagined what eyes her grandmother would look at her if she found out, how her sister would react. She was scared, wanted to scream, to hide from everyone and not go anywhere. She was afraid to go with Jack, but she was afraid to go home too. What to do? Upon reaching home, Elizabeth left Jack around the corner, sneaking into the house from the back door herself. Her sister and grandmother were in the vegetable garden. She quickly gathered some things from her clothes and shoes, and taking almost all the money from her grandmother's cash register, took one last look at her bed and decided to leave the house. She found a piece of paper and quickly wrote in pencil, "Gone with Jack. Address later, money back. Elizabeth." And so they went for the second day, 4 more to the end of the road, and then by bus 200 kilometers. Jack hid the money in his breast pocket. It was safer, and it was easier for him to buy food. After drinking a lot, he slept on the top shelf. Houses, towns, villages, forests, and meadows flashed by. It was very beautiful outside the window. Although Elizaveta never went far from home, she did not notice all this. Her mood was depressed, especially after another molestation by Jack in the restroom. "What am I doing? Why am I allowing this? But I can't have a scandal right in the train car. It's embarrassing." She wanted to get off at any station, to run away somewhere, so that no one saw her. No one knew anything. She did not imagine the beginning of family life in such a way. She thought it would be beautiful, solemn. With all her being, she realized that it was not what she had expected, but some force and fear did not let her go from this ruinous path. The woman sitting in the compartment sometimes looked sympathetically at Elizabeth, shook her head without saying anything. Finally, they reached the desired station. They got out of the carriage and walked to the bus station. The bus was in 3 hours. Only now Elizabeth noticed the fabulous nature of this region. Tall cedars with dark green paws, hanging down, clung to each other, swaying slightly in the breeze. It was summer. The intoxicating smell of pine needles penetrated her lungs. It was easy to breathe, and Elizaveta's mood lifted. She imagined a taiga village, wonderful nature, clean air. It suddenly struck her. Do your parents know that we are going? No way. Let it be a surprise, Jack laughed. The month of June was coming to an end. On August 1, the entrance exams to the university began. Nothing, thought Elizaveta. I'll get acquainted with his parents, and in 2 weeks, I'll go to the correspondence department. Jack went somewhere, then came back with 2 guys. It turned out fellow villagers. All 3 of them were drunk. They decided to celebrate. Jack pointed proudly at Elizabeth. That's mine. One of the guys said. What about Leslie? She was waiting for you, but she's already with child, with a soldier to be. And all 3 of them laughed. Elizabeth felt uncomfortable. God, where have I gotten myself into? She thought. In spite of everything, she still loved Jack, and she wanted to be with him. But as they approached Jack's house and she saw his family, she realized that she had really gotten herself into some kind of den. The house was not very old, but it was neglected, and there was wormwood growing in the garden. 4 dogs greeted them with frantic barking. Then came a woman with braided uncombed hair, wearing a dirty dress and smelling of booze. It appeared to be his mother. Elizabeth remembered Jack thinking about his mom, and she felt uneasy. Both sisters were also tipsy and unkempt. Who did you bring, son? His father asked, barely able to stand. My wife, Jack answered. Everyone stood and stared in amazement at Elizabeth, a clean, pretty girl with intelligent eyes. The older sister, slanting her eyes at Elizabeth's blouse, asked, And why the hell did you bring her here? We have nothing to eat ourselves, and stumbling, went along the wall. Elizabeth was horrified and wanted to go back immediately. Jack put his arm around her shoulders. Don't, Elizabeth, don't be afraid. They're good, just a little drunk. They entered the house. The place was a mess. 2 little girls about 45 years old slept in a corner, on a sweatshirt, with a big Siberian cat nestled next to them. There were no doormats. The floorboards were unpainted and dirty. Elizabeth shrank back, not knowing what to do. Then the owner of the house, the mother, came in. Joyful, with tears in her eyes, she began to embrace her son and Elizabeth. Son, you have money? We should celebrate your return. It's not every day we meet our son. And you've brought your wife, a pretty girl too. We should invite the family, or they'll be offended. We often go out with them, the mother said and looked at her son questioningly. Jack hesitated a little, then, agreeing with his mother, took out of his pocket the money left over from Elizabeth's grandmother's expenses and gave it to his mother. Taking the distraught Elizabeth aside, kissing and holding her close, looking into her eyes with boundless devotion, he said, Elizabeth, let us celebrate our meeting, our wedding. I with you, and you with me. We don't need anything else. We love each other so much. I'll earn money and send it to your grandmother after a month and a half. Valor, I wanted to go to a correspondence school. You'll have time, Elizabeth. We can do it next year. Elizaveta went back to her things and counted the money left in her purse. There were 2 rubles and 36 kopecks. That was all she had left. What happened then, she did not want to remember. Jack's family had gathered. They all liked to drink, bought cases of vodka, snacks, and started a grand drinking party. First, they drank for the arrival, then they shouted bitter. Jack got so drunk that he forgot about his young wife, and Elizabeth slipped into the yard behind the barn and cried bitterly. She clearly realized that nowhere cannot go. She has no money, and to ask her grandmother does not allow conscience. She was tormented by the thought of how in which she would repay the debt and what to write to her relatives about her stupidity. 2 months passed. At first, Elizabeth tried to put the house in order, but she did not see any results. Jack and Elizabeth were given a small room with a bed, a table, and a corner of the stove. The bed could not be called a bed. The food was potatoes and milk, and it was good that there were 2 cows, which Elizabeth learned to milk, and it became her duty. Relations with her sisters did not work out. Elizabeth felt like a stranger who had accidentally entered the house. The sisters, unashamedly scandalizing each other, began to put on things without asking her about it. Why you need them? You're so young, and you've already snatched up our Jack. We have to make our own destiny. We have to be liked by men. And you're not for strangers to look at. They were often gone for 2 or 4 days at a time. The kids were crying, looking for their moms. Jack's mother was a wastrel woman. She was about 48 years old and looked 65. Toothless, with stinking breath, she was constantly swearing and was dissatisfied with everyone and everything. Although, looking at her closely, especially after the bath, one could see traces of her former beauty, and the children could boast of her appearance. Jack's father was calm. It didn't take much intelligence to realize that he had once been mired in this swamp. One day, sitting alone and looking at Elizabeth, he said, "I am sorry for you, girl. I loved my wife so much when she was young. She was so beautiful. But there was nothing I could do. She had all her relatives born and raised in a drunken frenzy. In the end, I became part of that swamp myself. I couldn't bring up my children with dignity either." Elizabeth did not catch the secret meaning of Jack's father's words. Soon their family was visited by the district police officer about the fact that neither Elizabeth nor Jack had registered, not working anywhere. Yes, there used to be an article for idleness, and Jack, after mobilization, never came to the military enlistment office. And these are guests. The mother brazenly lied to the policemen, pointing at her grandchildren. The family found money for only one ticket for Jack, and he went to the district to solve problems. There was no work in the village. Elizaveta, not having a specialty, was temporarily hired at a neighboring state farm as a calf breeder. Jack got a job as a mechanic. Every day Elizabeth rode her bicycle to work. There was an opportunity to send her grandmother a debt. For Elizabeth, $100 was an unaffordable sum. She received a little $50 a month. Writing a letter to her relatives, she promised to send the debt, wrote that she was doing well, that she was happy, but did not give a return address. At work, her partner was Aunt Olivia, who treated her very warmly, almost like a daughter. Seeing how thin Elizabeth was, Olivia fed her buns and cakes. Soon Elizabeth realized she was pregnant. Olivia, noticing that the girl had become pale and often vomited, asked, "Are you expecting a baby?" "I don't know," Elizabeth replied. "Well, go to the midwife." At home, she shared with Jack. She thought he would be happy, but he was not happy and asked her to have an abortion. "The first abortion is undesirable and you're a long way off. So girl, you're gonna be the mom. The next appointment is in 2 weeks." The midwife made a card, wished Elizabeth well, and told her to eat better. Elizabeth and Jack did not register their marriage. She was not yet 18 years old. Another month passed. Elizabeth began to suffer from severe toxicosis. She became weak and her food was poor. She no longer dreamed of study. Sometimes it seemed to her that she would soon die without seeing her family and the baby. Sister Barbara urged Jack to get rid of the child. "This baby will tie your hands. She's from Washington. She won't live with you long. You'll be paying child support till you're 18, you fool. Think about what's in store for you. Your Leslie's getting a second year of child support and living on it. And you're gonna pay for it, you dumbass. Don't you dare register with her." On the one hand, Jack was used to Elizabeth. He liked her, and he even listened to her in some ways. But she's his own sister, his blood. She wouldn't give him bad advice. Besides, Barbara is older, knows life better, and she herself also received alimony. He also saw that young men at the state farm were looking at Elizaveta, and it made him angry. And Elizaveta, in turn, asked him to write an application for an apartment and move to the state farm. She already liked working with cows. True, the team was not very good, except for Aunt Olivia. The women liked to drink, celebrate everything, wash everything, and often swore with the mat. Elizaveta wanted to get out of her husband's family and live separately, have a child and be a mistress. She managed to send her grandmother 30 rubles, and she was pleased with herself. "I'll get paternity pay and send all the money," she thought. New Year was approaching. Everyone was preparing for the meeting. There were queues in the stores. Everyone wanted to buy presents and groceries. Elizaveta did not see any money from Jack. He often drank his paycheck with friends or relatives or gave it to his mother, a holy thing. Elizabeth wanted to have a good holiday. Prepare a table, like at grandma's, buy small gifts. She was happy in her own way. The belly is already rounded. At the reception, the midwife said that soon expected to move, that it is time to wear spacious clothes, which of course she did not have, and buy was not on what. Still, by New Year's Eve, she had raised some funds. She bought Jack some razors, her children some toothbrushes, her sisters some pantyhose, her mother a handkerchief, and her father some socks and a handkerchief. She walked on, pleased with herself. Though the gifts were insignificant, she hoped they would be welcome. Leslie congratulated her grandmother with a card too. Elizabeth felt so good. She walked leisurely. You can't ride a bicycle in winter, and the carriage left when she was at the store. 7 kilometers on foot was not so long. There were coniferous trees covered with snow all around. It was very beautiful. The frosty air slightly tingled my cheeks. It was so easy to breathe that she walked the distance to the village without feeling tired. The house was tense. Jack wasn't home. There were potatoes in a cast iron, black bread on the table, and a cold kettle beside it. The oven was also cold. New Year's Eve was not even smelled. Elizaveta became heavy and resentful. She went into her room and lay down, feeling weak and dizzy. She wanted to sleep. In the kitchen, the sisters-in-law were bickering. Both of them did not have regular jobs, citing that there was no one to leave the children with. Occasionally, they worked part-time. Elizabeth fell into a light sleep. She was awakened by a rumble, something falling. The sisters were discussing family life. She heard that Jack has been seeing Leslie for 2 months now, and she doesn't know, and that he would be spending New Year's Eve with his old girlfriend. Elizabeth was numbed by the news, choked up, wanting to scream with resentment so painful that she could not find the words to describe it. Beyond such betrayal, the name Leslie, the name her sister bears. Then her mother came in and asked her rudely, "What have you brought in your bag?" Elizabeth stood up, took the bag and handed over the gifts. The new relatives did not expect such a turn, stood in a daze, and to some extent even rejoiced. But then the elder sister Barbara, cursing foully, said, "You send your remittances of $30, and you feed us with handouts. You're a good little snob. Jack won't marry you. You're not 18 years old yet. So your degenerate will not get alimony. Do not wait." Elizabeth cried bitterly and went to her room without saying anything in reply. She had long ago guessed that the sisters were going through her bag, and that she had sent the money they found out at the post office from a friend. She no longer wanted New Year's Eve or the baby she was carrying. God, what am I gonna do? How am I gonna get out of here? God help me. In the other room there was laughter and some kind of commotion. They decided to celebrate New Year's Eve, Elizabeth thought. She calmed down, only tears rolled from her eyes without stopping. She spent New Year's Eve on her bed in her den. Jack wasn't home. When the noise died down, Elizabeth got up, dressed, and went out into the yard. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. There was noise in the village and lights were burning. Not knowing why, Elizabeth walked up to the house. The windows were not curtained. Elizabeth saw a group of young people celebrating a holiday. Jack was not with them. She breathed a sigh of relief and turned and wanted to walk back. "You creep, you're watching," she heard. Jack was standing in front of her. He had been drinking heavily and had gone out for a smoke. Furious, he ran up to her, grabbed her arm and pushed her so hard that she fell on her back. "I loved Nastia for a long time, and you yourself imposed on me," he shouted angrily and desperately kicked her in the stomach. Elizabeth felt sick. She felt dizzy, nauseous, and her ears were ringing. She lay on the snow, unable to get up. Jack spat to the side and walked toward the house. The only thing she heard was, "You, Valeraka, calm down." "I love you, sweetheart," Leslie said affectionately. She woke up when she felt someone dragging her through the snow. "You've got to be so drunk. She might freeze to death," some man said, dragging her toward Jack's house. The door was open. The man dragged Elizabeth into the hallway and left. She struggled to get to her room. It was very hard to breathe. Her lower back and stomach ached. Alex, one of Jack's brothers, came back in the morning and, seeing Elizabeth sleeping alone, decided to have some fun with her while his older brother was away. Elizabeth was his age and liked him. He often saw his brother treat her roughly and felt sorry for her. He wanted to be with her, so he ventured out. But when he put his hand under her skirt, felt something sticky and saw blood, he realized that something was wrong with the girl. Alex got dressed and quickly ran to the doctor, who fortunately was at home. Elizaveta was taken in the director's car to the district hospital. She lost a lot of blood and was often unconscious. She went into premature labor. The baby girl who was born was dead. Jack found out about it 3 days later. Both he and his relatives were afraid that Elizabeth would tell the police station the reason for her condition, although everyone in the village knew that Jack had beaten his wife. Leslie threw him out. "Go and find an alibi for yourself. I don't want to go through with this case. I have a child." Elizabeth recovered very slowly. Weakened body and constant malnutrition affected the girl's condition. People from the state farm came to visit her. Many people donated blood. The relatives from her husband's side did not come, and Jack himself was only twice. When he saw her weakened and thin, her face graying, he decided, why would he need such a wife? And it was unlikely that she would be able to give birth again. But when Jack was summoned to the investigation department and explained what he would face in case Elizabeth filed a report on his behavior, the mood of the family changed dramatically. Jack's sisters and parents visited her. They were courteous, brought groceries, sympathized, and her mother even cried. Alex suffered the most. He was being drafted into the army in the spring. Alex decided that if Jack throws Elizabeth out, he will find her and will definitely marry. Elizabeth even seemed that everyone loved her and that she was previously unfair to her husband's kin. Jack's feelings also sharpened. He began to come more often, long sat with Elizabeth, kissed her hands, tenderly embraced. Elizabeth perked up. The process of recovery went faster. A healthy blush appeared, a sparkle in her eyes. Alex also came a few times, but he came alone, without his family. Elizabeth knew that if it weren't for him, she would probably have died, and she was grateful to him. But he always stood there and was silent, only looking at her with all his eyes and thinking about something of his own. Elizaveta had no idea of his feelings. Elizaveta was discharged at the end of February. She did not go to court because she thought it was wrong to report her husband and make a mess of things. She wrote to her grandmother and Leslie that she was doing well, that she was working, and that she and Jack wanted to visit them in the summer. But as it turned out, spring came. The roads were so muddy you couldn't get through. The mail hadn't come for a month. The grocery store hadn't come either. Jack's family started fighting and drinking again. Alex had been in the army, and they'd been drinking for a week. Jack quit his job and spent nights at Leslie's. Elizabeth was temporarily out of work because of the road. She washed, cleaned, cooked at home. One night in front of everyone, Jack said he wasn't going to get married anytime soon. "I don't want a family. I don't want to live in bondage. I've had enough women to last me a lifetime." "What about me?" Elizabeth was confused. "Why did you follow him? Did you think you would have found a simpleton and wanted to settle down?" Barbara shouted, "You should have gotten out of here a long time ago. You wanted to have a baby and live off child support." Elizabeth left the table, a lump in her throat. "Give me the money for the ticket. I'll leave right away." Here we go, here we go. "And when you came here, who gave you the money?" "What a hottie. Look for someone dumber than us." The next day, Elizaveta wanted to borrow money from the neighbors, but all the neighbors knew Jack's family, and no one wanted to lend. "I can't wait for it to dry. I'll get a job and leave here with my first paycheck," Elizabeth decided. In May, buses and cars started moving. Elizabeth went to work with the cows. Aunt Olivia also advised her to leave. "As long as you're alive and well, go away. You don't belong here in this family. You'll ruin yourself, or you'll get drunk like them." And then came the long-awaited paycheck. For a week, Elizabeth gathered her small belongings, received the settlement, took the workbook and characteristic from the place of work. She happily hurried home. In the morning, she decided to leave. She didn't tell anyone about her plans. Jack didn't care about her. He'd been on a bender for a week. Her father and mother were living their own lives. Her sister had had another fling with a man and left for a neighboring village, taking her children with her. But Barbara was on the alert. She watched Elizabeth as she did her laundry and put away her clothes. The bus that passed through their village passed by every other day, in the morning at 77.30. Elizaveta had prepared a bag from the evening. At the bottom, she put all the money and documents. She went out into the yard, went into the bathhouse, then returned to the house. Barbara wasn't there. While Elizaveta was washing, she did not notice how she had slipped to the gate. Her bag was under the bed. She had not bought any new things, some of them worn out, some better ones taken by her sisters. She picked up the bag and was glad that it was light. It would not be so heavy on the way. She lay down on her bed and thought for the first time how she would live her life. She was ashamed to return home in front of her relatives for her marriage. She was also afraid of her grandmother's reaction, her judgmental eyes. Leslie might still understand, but Grandma, I wonder what her classmates would think. Probably condemn her. And Anna, her favorite teacher? Soon she fell asleep. In the morning at 6 o'clock, having milked the cows and filtered the milk, she went into the house. Everyone was asleep. She looked longingly at Barbara's children. She especially liked the boy. She played with him more often and felt sorry for him. Glancing at her watch, Elizabeth drank a glass of milk and bread, took her bag and quickly left the house. The bus arrived on time. Elizabeth was the only passenger on the bus. The chauffeur said, "You will pay. There will sit the controller." Elizaveta sat down and nodded off. It was 60 kilometers to the next stop. The controller got on the bus and they drove off. After chatting with the driver for another 20 minutes, she decided to pick up the passengers. Feeling a hand on her shoulder, Elizabeth woke up. "Pay the fare," she heard. Elizabeth quickly unzipped her bag and was stunned. Everything in the bag was torn. There was no money. Her employment card and characteristic were torn and crumpled. There were some things missing. Elizaveta felt sick. She turned pale. "Maybe when I was milking the cows," she thought. "I'm sorry, I don't have any money," she whispered. Then why did she get on the bus? But it was there. Someone had taken it. There was disapproval on the bus. The controller asked the driver to stop and let Elizabeth off. The girl stayed on the road. The bus, dusting, quickly disappeared. Despair gripped Elizabeth. She sat down on the grass on the side of the road and, dazed, sat for 2 hours. During that time, no one passed in either direction. It was morning. The weather promised to be hot. The sun had already risen above the trees. The air was intoxicating. Meadow grasses were blooming, thinning a light fragrance. Coniferous trees of rich green color stood in a wall along the road. "How beautiful nature is here, and how lonely and bad I am here," Elizabeth thought. There was no one to go back to, and there was no way to get home. No food, no money, and so far away. Tears streamed down her cheeks. What have I done? I've ruined my own life. She realized that Barbara had taken the money and things. There was no way I was going back, so I had to go forward. Elizabeth got up and walked down the road following the bus. She walked for quite a long time. It must have been about 2 or 3 in the afternoon when she heard some movement behind her. A tractor trailer was catching up with Elizabeth. It was driven by a man in his 60s. "How far are you going, girl?" "I'd like to go to the railroad station." "And when will you get there?" laughed the man. "It can't be helped. The bus will be only the day after tomorrow," said Elizaveta. "You should sleep less, then you wouldn't be late. Get on the trailer. I'll take you there, and it's about 80 kilometers to the station. The buses run more often there." The man smoked, and after waiting for Elizaveta to get on, started on his way. On the outskirts of the village he stopped. "I don't want to get into trouble with the police, so I'll go on my own." "It's not far," said the tractor driver. "The station is still 80 kilometers away." Whether she would be able to get there without incident, she did not know. The girl was glad that the night would not catch her either in the field or in the forest. When she reached the bus station, she learned that the bus would be at 10 a.m. She was afraid to go in the dark. There was nowhere to sleep. And what was the point of waiting for the bus? She had no money anyway. It was getting evening. The cashier closed the cash register and left. Elizabeth stayed alone in the room that was considered a bus station. "I have to close the bus station. It's time for you to leave." "There won't be any buses," said the cleaning lady. "Close it with me, please," asked Elizaveta. I got off the bus. I have no acquaintances or relatives here. No hotel in the village either. I don't know what to do, and I'm afraid to spend the night on the street." The woman, thinking that there was nothing to steal, agreed. After locking Elizaveta up, she quietly went home. It was tough sleeping on the bench. No comforts, and she didn't need them. Since morning she had eaten nothing, only drank water from the column. The girl expected to have lunch at the station in the cafeteria, buy a ticket and groceries for the train. But it happened that there was no station, no groceries, no train, and no money. What is waiting for me? How do I go on? She was terrified. In the morning, the cleaning lady opened the door. Elizaveta thanked her, went out quickly, did not wait for the bus, left without asking anything. Elizaveta did not know what to do next. Borrow money from someone, but who would give it to her? To go to look for a job, but where to live and what to eat before the paycheck. She saw a column, went up, washed her face and drank water. She asked a passerby for directions and walked. She had to get to the railroad station by all means, and then what would happen? She was lucky. There was a milk truck on the road, and she raised her hand. The driver, a young guy smiling with a sense of humor, was on his way to the dairy. It turned out to be on the way. Only, girl, please don't be silent and sing something for the fare. Where are you going, Birdie? To the railroad station. Going somewhere else? I guess you're going to enroll. Where to, if it's no secret? Wherever they'll accept you, Elizabeth answered. I can't understand you girls. Always want something, always dreaming of something. Live more simply, and it will be sweeter, he said and laughed. This relaxed conversation reminded Elizabeth of another life, not the one she had had for the last year. She felt better, her mood lifted. Where's the song? Elizabeth had never sung for the last year. She had even forgotten that there was such a state when she wanted to sing. She thought for a while and chose the same song about her mother that she had heard from Jack. The chauffeur liked it, and she was a little distracted from her thoughts. But the feeling of uncertainty, the insecurity, the fear of the unknown. The guy's name was Jacob. He looked at his watch and said, I'm on time to take you to the station. May you be lucky enough to get in. This simple kindness filled her soul so much that she wanted to kiss the guy. She was very happy. She had never imagined that she would get to the station so quickly and safely. Elizabeth stood in front of the station. Lord, help me, she prayed. The bus would arrive at night, and the parking lot would be 2 minutes. Feverish thoughts flashed through the girl's mind. How to sit down without a ticket. It would take 6 days to get there. It would be possible to use electric trains for short distances, but there are no electric trains here, and the trains are every other day. What to do? Where to get money? An empty bottle caught her eye. She decided to collect all the bottles she could find, turn them in, and get a ticket for as much money as she could afford. But there were hardly any bottles at the station. She found only 2. There was a glass recycling center nearby. They gave her 24 cents. At the station, she bought a bun and tea. Hunger was making itself felt, for she had not eaten for 2 days. The evening was approaching, and with it the arrival of the train. Elizabeth decided to ask the conductors, in case they could persuade her, though it was unlikely. The train arrived without delay. The girl ran to the open doors and tearfully begged and pleaded. Wow, you've got a lot of claims, the young, slender conductor told her. I don't know who you are and why you're going to Washington without a ticket. Maybe you're going to jail, and I'm responsible. The car door closed, and with it the possibility of leaving disappeared. The train was moving fast. She went to the station, sat down on a bench, and spent the night like that. The next day there was no train. Elizabeth hung around the nearby streets, waiting for the next train. Maybe she'll be lucky, she thought. This day she managed to collect more bottles, as many as 5. She turned them in and even had lunch in the canteen. Enough for half a portion of soup and tea. On a neighboring table, people left 2 slightly bitten pieces of bread. She took them. The second day of waiting was the same. At night, the Moskovsky arrived. It was impossible to leave. God, what to do? What to do? She sat on a bench on the platform and wrapped her arms around her head. A hobo walked by with a bag full of empty bottles. The man was drunk. Elizabeth secretly envied him. Across 2 platforms stood a freight train with tanks labeled gasoline. The track workers going around the train were banging the wheels of the cars with hammers. In the middle, right in front of Elizabeth, was a wagon with a vestibule, open on all sides. Elizabeth sat staring dumbly in front of her. The selector announced the arrival of the train. If only someone had lost his wallet, Elizabeth dreamed. All kinds of ridiculous thoughts visited her poor head. The passenger train left. The lights on the semaphore flickered. It was announced that 217 was to be sent from the 3rd track. This told the girl nothing. Suddenly, Elizabeth saw the man move away from his bottles. She, like a she-wolf, rushed at her prey, grabbed the valise. One of the bottles fell out and crashed to the pavement with a crack. The man woke up and rushed to Elizabeth. She grabbed the bottles in the bag and rushed forward. At that time, the freight train began to move slowly, and the man managed to grab her by the sleeve of her blouse. "You bitch." She rushed forward. A piece of sleeve remained in his hands. Having reached the car, she threw her bag in the vestibule, but the bottles could not pull out of the clinging hands of the man. The girl managed to jump on the step. The train was gaining speed. The man angrily threw the bottle at Elizabeth. She felt a strong pain in her head. Her ears rang. She climbed into the car, fell to her knees, tore her left one in blood, and lost consciousness. She woke up in the evening, the sun was already setting, and the train was rushing and rushing. She felt a strong pain in her head, blood caked behind her ear, her back ached, her left knee burned, and the train kept rushing and rushing at full sail, clanking and jerking. The wind fluttered her hair mercilessly. It was chilly. It was dark night. Elizabeth was no longer crying. She cursed her rash decision, Jack, her first love, and her weakness. Why didn't I go to the police? Why hadn't I reported my situation? I was so worried about him. I didn't want him to be disturbed, and he probably forgot about me. Why am I so stupid? The train had been running nonstop all night, and the sun was already shining, but he kept going. Perhaps it stopped somewhere, but our traveler fell into a deep sleep. No one disturbed her. No one knew about the passenger of the freight train. Elizabeth woke up with thirst and sucking pain in her stomach. We'd approached some kind of a junction. The train stopped and she decided to get off. There was a box in a small house by the tracks. Perhaps she could find out where the train was going and get something to eat. She walked slowly towards the house. There was a girl of about 10 years old playing outside. "Is Mommy home?" Elizabeth asked. "No. She went with Derek to Grandma's. Grandma is sick, and they didn't take me. They need someone to look after the house. And Daddy's at work." Elizabeth asked the girl to give her some water and some bread. "But don't go in the house. You're dirty and you might steal something. I'll bring it to you myself." Elizabeth grinned bitterly. "Wow, people are already afraid of me." The girl soon brought a piece of bread and a half-liter can of milk. Elizabeth sat down on the stump and ate everything greedily. The girl also brought her a mirror and a bucket of water. Elizabeth cleaned herself up as best she could. Her hair was greasy, covered in locomotive soot, and her face was grimy. Elizabeth hastily washed her hands, face, and feet and asked for a bottle of water to take with her. The lights flashed on the semaphore, and Elizabeth was in the carriage in no time. The train was gaining momentum. Where am I going? Why? So she traveled another day. In the evening, she realized from the names of the stations that she was going somewhere in Canada. She got scared. Where am I going? What am I going to do next? At 5 a.m., she saw a big city. It was the Republican Center. It was warm and very beautiful. The sun was coming out of the mountains. The train stopped. She slowly crawled out of her hiding place. She looked at her dress. Dirty, with a torn piece on the shoulder. How could she go out in public like that? Still, Elizabeth went, entered the station, found the women's restroom. On the sink lay laundry soap. Elizabeth happily washed herself and drank plenty of water. Her left knee was swollen and a little pus. She washed the wound, took off her dress, and threw it in the trash. From her bag, she took out a sweatshirt and a pair of sports tights. Once dressed, the girl walked out into the waiting room and approached the information desk. "How much is a ticket to Washington, and on what train is better to get there?" There was no money. Elizabeth inquired if there was any work at the station. Anything, no matter. But there were no vacancies. She walked through the neighboring yards, wanted to get a job as a janitor or cleaner, but even here she had no luck. She was afraid to go far from the station. The station was her hope of returning home. She had to collect bottles again, enough for a bun and a cake and tea. She could drink as much water as she wanted from the tap in the toilet, and it already seemed happiness to her. 2 days passed. On the 3rd day in the evening, the lady on duty at the station came to Elizabeth and asked her why she was not leaving and asked her to show her ticket. Elizabeth was unable to answer anything. The policeman on duty would have to be called in to detain her. Someone distracted the woman. Elizabeth, having seized the moment, hid in the crowd of people going out on the platform. On the tracks was boarding the train. Elizabeth stood in the crowd between 8 and 9 cars. The conductors were talking to each other. "Is your car reserved?" "Yes, the passengers from the rest home will board at 2. Minors, their families, so I'm free for now." In car 9, the boarding doors didn't open. The conductress from the 9th carriage was chatting with the conductress from the 8th carriage. Both were young, funning and laughing about something of their own. 5 minutes to departure came from the selector. The 8-car conductor, having boarded her passengers, asked her friend to come to her for a moment. Elizabeth, with the speed of a wildcat, climbed into the 8 car and quickly snuffed through the vestibule into the 9. Ducking down, she ran a little through the car, snuck into the first open compartment and lurked, so as not to rattle anything. I climbed onto the second shelf, then onto the third, where luggage is usually placed, lay down and hid. Soon I heard footsteps. Both conductresses walked along the corridor, looked into the compartment. Elizabeth was not noticed. The door clicked and the compartment was closed. How good it is to serve the compartment. But I like the parlor car, where everything is in plain sight, but there is more dirt. Let's have lunch in your carriage. The girls from 6 and 7 will be here. We'll sit till the next station, it's not that far. We'll be there around evening. Come on, go to your carriage and invite them. Elizabeth heard everything. Both were afraid to sneeze or give themselves away. Soon the laughing and talking were over. The company dispersed and Elizabeth fell into a deep sleep. The girl woke up with a click in the lock. The conductress opened the compartment. Boarding will begin soon, Elizabeth realized. Nightmare, what awaits me? What will happen next? Everything froze inside her. Her heart pounded hard. The veins in her head pulsed. The train was slowing down. The cars creaked and braked at the next station. The selector announced boarding. Elizabeth was close to fainting. And now she heard talking, shuffling feet, laughter. The door of her compartment opened. 4 girls ran in. The first 2 were about 67 years old, the second about 23. 2 young women came in after them. One of them was taller, full and black, the other short, blonde. They were escorted in by a large man. He kissed the small woman and asked her to say hello to her brother and invited everyone to come more often. They had a little luggage, fruit, melons, watermelons, and 2 buckets of apricot jam. The black woman took the 2 girls and left the compartment. I've already washed mine, she laughed when she came back. Now it's your turn. The blonde woman left with hers for a while. Then, having settled down, the women began to set the table. The guide brought tea. Blackie said, "Come on, girls, let's eat and go to bed. The older ones will fit on the second shelves, and the little ones with their mothers on the lower ones." The compartment was closed so that the little ones would not run out into the corridor. Elizabeth pressed herself against the wall as hard as she could, her heart pounding frantically. She waited for her fate and realized that she could not escape the moment when she would be discovered. She lay in her hiding place and watched the passengers. Not a word, not a movement of the women escaped her. The dark-haired one was more severe. The other, on the contrary, was soft and smiling, with a kind of unknown warmth emanating from her. Meanwhile, everyone sat down at the table. They cut the odoriferous melon, took out other food. The compartment smelled pleasant and appetizing. Elizabeth hadn't eaten anything for 24 hours, and she felt a little dizzy. One of the little girls looked up and their eyes met. The girl cried, clung to her mother, pointing her finger at Elizabeth and screamed, "Mommy, I'm afraid." Elizabeth was discovered. "How do you think you're going to get home?" Maria asked. "I don't know. I don't have a penny, and it's a long way to Washington," Elizabeth said. Suddenly a thought awakened her mind. Looking at Maria, she asked quietly, "Could you give me $50? I would send it to you at once. Write me your address. I won't cheat, I promise." Leslie shook her head disapprovingly. "Oh, that kind of money. It would be better if we took you to a guide." Elizabeth noticed Leslie's beautiful gold rings, a wide chain, and intricate, massive earrings. One rarely wore so much gold in those days. Not everyone wore wedding bands. Maria calmly remarked, "You know, I thought I should have told the conductor yesterday. Now it's too late. We'll still be guilty for hiding. Come on, get upstairs and cover yourself. They'll be here soon." It was still 13 hours to Karaganda. Leslie and her children were to be met by her husband, Maria's brother, so they were both waiting for the meeting. Elizabeth spent the whole day on the top luggage rack. The women fed her and helped her out if necessary. Maria had been brooding since the morning. When Elizabeth went to the bathroom, she spoke. "Let's give her that $50. "What are you doing?" she objected. "I'm dreaming of an accident-free trip. If it weren't for you and your pity, she would have been in the police a long time ago. Don't you feel sorry for her? You can't pity everyone." Maria thought again. Something in her soul told her that this girl was in trouble, that if they did not help her, there was no telling what would happen. Where could fate throw her? Maybe to prison, or maybe she would be raped and killed. The thought of it made her uncomfortable. "Leslie, I think I'm gonna give her some money." "What, do you have a little extra?" "If you don't want anything, buy it for your kids or your husband. Why don't you get your mother-in-law or sister-in-law a present? You can see she's a crook." At that moment, Elizabeth came in and climbed upstairs. She heard Leslie's last words, and she felt sorry for herself. She felt silent, her thoughts were not happy. That was how they traveled halfway through the day. The girls seemed to have forgotten all about her. They played merrily. Near Karaganda at the sorting station, Maria said, "I'll give you $50. Of course, it would be nice if you would come and show me the ticket." She took out her purse, took out $50 from her wallet, wrote down her address and handed it to Elizaveta. Elizaveta could not believe her eyes and ears, took the money and began to thank Maria. "Well, Maria, you're a fool. At least do not tell your husband that you lend money to anyone." On the platform, Leslie and the children met her husband. Everyone came out of the compartment. Mary was happy to see her brother, the girls were frolicking, and Elizabeth ran to the station. She whirled into the building. 3 ticket offices were open. The 4th was closed. Elizabeth stood at the 3rd ticket office. She wanted to be able to show Marie her ticket in time. There were not so many people, but the service was slow. Behind the window of the 4th ticket office, she saw movement. One man was there at once. Elizabeth was the second. The 2 ticket booths closed, and passengers rushed to take the line again, cursing at the inconvenience. All the way to Washington, coach 1. Only general seats left to Washington. "Do you want to take it?" "Yes, let's take the general." Elizabeth was happier than she had ever been in her life. She still had money left, and she wanted to pay it back to reduce her debt. Running out onto the platform, she saw the train gaining momentum. "Maria will probably think badly of me," she was upset. She stood for a while longer, then began to prepare to leave. She went to the store, bought herself a simple chintz dress and groceries for the road. She wanted to go to a bathhouse, but she could not find one nearby, and she was afraid to go far from the station in case she got lost and would not catch the train. She spent the night at the station, and in the morning she got into her car, took the second shelf, and happily lay down on the hard surface. It was going to be a long journey, but now she was not afraid of anything. She had a ticket, groceries, and still had $3.74 left. She was a rich woman. In the common carriage, the passengers were changing quickly. She did not hesitate to collect the remaining bottles and put them under the bottom seat. One of the women forgot her bag in the carriage. When she arrived in Washington, D.C., she had a lot of bottles. They rattled every time she moved, but Elizabeth was not ashamed of it. She had to live somehow. The girl at the kiosk turned in the containers, and her budget was replenished. She walked along the platform in the station, again collected bottles that no one needed, and again took them to the kiosk. She spent the night at the station, and in the morning Elizabeth arrived at the university where she had submitted her documents for admission last year. August was approaching. The 1st of August began the entrance exams. In the admissions office, Elizabeth asked about her documents. The secretary looked at her strangely, went somewhere, and only an hour later brought a cardboard binder. "Why didn't you take the exams last year?" "It just happened." "If you're going to enter this year, bring your employment history for the last year and a character reference from your last place of work." Remembering her shredded papers, Elizaveta quietly replied, "I think I'll take my documents. I don't have a characterization and there is no one to write it." The woman was surprised, but there was no time to question Elizaveta. More and more applicants were coming. The competition numbered about 10 people per place. Elizaveta realized that there were enough applicants without her with her problems and unpreparedness. After leaving the institute, she sat down on a bench. What to do next? She was afraid of her grandmother. She thought she would be misunderstood. She didn't return the money either. She was afraid of meeting acquaintances, afraid of being questioned. 2 girls sat next to her. It was obvious from their simple clothes that they were both from the provinces. One of them said, "Mabel, I'm afraid we won't pass the competition. Even if we pass the exam, 10 people per place is too many. We don't know what's going to happen with the dorms. At the consultation, I realized that I am unfamiliar with a lot of things, although Veronica said at school that it would be easy for me to enter. I'm also afraid of not passing the competition. Let's try the library technical school. There is a small competition. 2 people per place. They promised to provide dormitory for all non-residents. My aunt told me." Elizabeth, like a drowning man grasping at straws, grasped at the idea. "Girls, where is this library? Are you also afraid of not getting in?" "Yes, I am." And so Elizabeth is a student of the library technical school. She went to the director and explained why there is no labor or characteristic, but since she successfully passed the entrance exams, She was enrolled in the first course. The term of study: 3 years, a place in a dormitory, and a stipend of $10 a month. This in her situation could only dream of. Elizabeth studied easily. She soon liked librarianship. Teachers were pleased with her. It was a good school preparation. The only thing she had trouble with was clothes. Soon the cold weather would come, and she had neither warm clothes nor shoes. She didn't want to go home. It was a shame to arrive without money. Her relatives did not know that she was near, that it was very hard for her. She sent her last letter from Alaska in early June, saying that she was doing well. Money was tight, her scholarship was not enough, and she had little food. In the evenings, so that no one would see her, she would go out and collect bottles to make ends meet. The girls in the dormitory shunned her, but she was glad to have a roof over her head and a bed. It was October, the cold weather and the autumn rains were beginning. One day, standing at some entranceway to avoid getting wet, she noticed an announcement. Need a caregiver for an elderly woman. Apply to apartment number 7, Elizabeth. Without thinking for a long time, found the 7th apartment. She was opened by a woman of about 35 years old. According to the woman, there was a difficult situation in the family. Her mother-in-law lives alone. She is seriously ill and practically does not leave the house. Her relatives are far away. One of her sons is a military man, now somewhere in Afghanistan, and for 2 years there has been no news from him. The mother feels the uncertainty hard, and now there is a new blow. Her first son, the husband of Elizaveta's interlocutor, was killed in a traffic accident. He left behind a wife and 3 children. The youngest twins are only 4 months old. There is no one to help. It was agreed that Elizabeth would come after classes, go to the store, clean, cook, do laundry. When sick, stay overnight. Payment of $5 a month, more cannot, as the grandmother's pension of $12. Elizabeth agreed and was very happy. The roommates in the dormitory were skeptical about this news. Only one, Katia, understood, Elizaveta. She was familiar with the laws of hard life. 3 months passed. One night, Elizaveta had a dream about Maria. By this time, Elizabeth could only save $10. She kept Maria's address as the apple of her eye and knew it by heart. In the morning, she was in a terrible mood. What would she think of me? Probably that Leslie was right and I was a con artist. Days and months passed. Elizabeth was doing well in school. She didn't socialize with girls, didn't go to dances, didn't meet young men. She was grateful to her sick grandmother, Catherine, who gave her some clothes. All the clothes were good, but long out of fashion. Her grandmother's sister-in-law, Kimberly, also brought Elizabeth some of her own clothes that were too small for her. One day, as Elizabeth was collecting bottles at the suburban train station, someone called out to her, "Elizabeth, are you there?" In front of her stood her former classmate, well-dressed, with a beautiful handbag. She was finishing her 2nd year at the institute and was going home for the weekend. Elizabeth wanted to run away, but after thinking about it, she asked not to tell anyone about their meeting. Soon a young man showed up. The girl was worried that he would not see her in the company of a beggar and hurried to him. What a nightmare! What if Grandma finds out about me? Not that flashed through Elizabeth's mind. Time flies quickly, already the 1st year is over. For the summer, Elizabeth went to live with Catherine. 11 months after the adventure, Maria received a notice of transfer of $50. She didn't think about the money anymore and stopped waiting. On the receipt in the letter box, it said, "Dear Maria, sorry for the delay, EBT. Thank you, UUHELPD me ELIZABT. Good thing I wasn't wrong about her." Maria smiled and sent Leslie a postcard with only 2 words, "Debt paid back." The reply came back, "Really? Congratulations." Another year passed. Elizabeth went to Baba Catherine's house after class, as usual. As she entered the apartment, she saw Kimberly. The woman called Elizabeth for tea, thanked her for everything and said that they no longer needed her help. The children grew up a little, and they decided to live together. Catherine did not want to live away from her grandchildren. Elizaveta graduated from technical college. She worked in the library in the technical department. She was already 25 years old. She traveled to her family, paid her debt to her grandmother. Grandmother was in pretty good shape. The meeting turned out to be very touching. At first, of course, she scolded Elizabeth that she ran away without a marriage license, which brought shame on her gray head. But if you came to apologize, you should be forgiven. Then the grandmother was moved and again began to scold Elizaveta that she had wandered about the world and had not sent word for a long time, that she had grown too proud but had not asked for help, that she had been sitting at her side but had not shown her eyes at home. The lamentations and tears stretched far past midnight. On the morning came a new day, and joy settled in the house. A day later, Leslie arrived with her husband and 2 children. Elizabeth's life was getting better. She continued to work in her library, lived in the dormitory for working youth. Elizabeth did not even think about marriage. Young guys who looked at her shunned. She was happy with her existence. She could afford something, but when she saw a thrown bottle, she always wanted to pick it up. One day on the evening shift, a man about 32-35 years old came into the library and asked for a book on mechanics. He seemed familiar to her for some reason. His last name was quite common, Stone. There was already a card with the same last name in her box. She put the card on the stranger's card. He signed for the book he had received and walked out. Elizabeth noticed that the man's left hand was in a strange, unnatural position. She took out the first card, compared the pictures. They were very different. Strange, I haven't seen him anywhere, she thought. 10 days later he came again, changed the book for another, and left. He reminded Elizabeth of someone again, but her work distracted her and she forgot about him. When he came a third time, Elizabeth was sure she had seen him somewhere before. All evening she remembered and could not remember where she had met him before, and the man did not recognize her at all. 10 days later he appeared again in the library. He took a book on metal science. He stayed a little longer, looked at the contents, and went out. It was only at the end of the day that Elizabeth remembered. That's right, I saw his youthful picture on the dresser at Grandma Catherine's. How come I hadn't guessed it before? She was surprised. After all, the last name is the same, and she told me about him. And they had the same eyes. The next time she asked him about Grandma Catherine. They got to talking. Alan told her that his mother had died before she could see him. He is a career officer, was a prisoner of war in Afghanistan, was wounded in the left arm, for which he was written off and released from military service. He is disabled group 2 and now learns a new profession. They began to meet. Black Sea coast. A lot of vacationers. Under an umbrella settled a family. A little boy about 5 years old jumped and fell in the sand, brought water in a bucket and watered his mom and dad. He was having fun. Dad was watching someone. What did you see there? The wife asked. In the eyes of the husband flashed a playful light. Yes, a mermaid came out of the foam. I've been watching her for the second day. What beautiful eyes the girl has. You could drown in them faster than in the sea. And her mom is nice, attractive. I'll give you that, you're going to drown in someone's eyes. He heard his wife grumbling jokingly. She raised up on her elbow. Show me your mermaid. I'll go and turn her into a one-eyed daredevil, so that she would not ruin the good young man, she giggled. As soon as she looked in the right direction, her face changed dramatically. She became serious, somehow gathered, stood up and quickly went to the woman and the girl. The husband got worried. Where are you going? I was joking. He wanted to stop her, but a sharp cry from the child made him look back. Maria was spreading a large towel on the sand. Hello, she heard behind her. Hello, Maria replied. In front of Maria stood a young unfamiliar woman in a dark green swimsuit. You must be mistaken, but hello anyway and have a nice day. Of course it's her. It's her voice, the same soft pronunciation. I've heard it more than once in my dreams. The unknown woman knelt down in front of Maria and asked, Have you ever given $50 in a train card to a hungry wanderer? Maria looked at the young woman carefully and remembered that poor girl. She couldn't remember how many years had passed since then, probably 10, maybe 15. Yes, she replied surprisingly she did. Alan couldn't hear them, but he saw the two women talking animatedly, interrupting each other, and the face of the young girl sitting next to them, the same mermaid, expressed surprise and slight shock. The man became nervous, but decided not to interfere. When Elizabeth came back, Alan noticed a change in her. He had never seen his wife's face like that before. Suddenly, Elizabeth fell to the sand and sobbed. She remembered everything, every detail. She was in a state that only a suffering person can experience. Alan was perplexed. Elizabeth, my dear, what did she say to you? I will go and deal with her at once. Elizabeth raised herself up and barely managed to grab his hand. Don't. You don't know anything. She never told anyone about herself. That day they did not swim, although the son was always reaching for the water. Alan learned what his wife had suffered in her youth. He was struck by the fact that she collected bottles at train stations, picked up a piece of bread left by someone. Having finished the story, Elizabeth calmed down a little, lay down on the sand. Silent, endless tears flowed down her cheeks. "No one will hurt you again. I will not allow," Alan said firmly, stroking his wife's hand affectionately. And a little aside, a girl with big, beautiful eyes asked in surprise, "Mommy, how come? You always taught us to think over our spending, to be careful about unfamiliar people. And you yourself gave such money to the first dirty girl you met." "You know, child," Maria said thoughtfully, "at night on the train, I realized at some point that it was my moral duty, a duty to help a person in need.